Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of Planetos Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the fans of George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire and HBO's A Game of Thrones. A warning for all you listeners out there, this podcast will discuss all material, including the books, Dunk and Egg, The World of Ice and Fire, the novellas, the upcoming Fire and Blood, and the sample chapters from The Winds of Winter, as well as all the show episodes, commentaries, bonus content, theories and essays, quotes and interviews by George, anything and everything. This podcast will cover speculation on season 8. We're not talking about any possible leaks or talking about the filming information, but be warned that it could slip up by us. So enter at your own risk. I'm one of your hosts, Brett. You can find me on Twitter at HomelyPillow.
And I'm your other host, Travis. I can be found at Sir_Travis on Twitter. We hope you enjoy today's show.
Woo.
Now, we all know that George is a brilliant writer. He's weaving a rich and complex tapestry in his story. He has created thousands of named characters, hundreds of places, a vast world filled with schemes and plots, magic and mystery, prophecies and politics that are all very dense and layered. In the story, Westeros and Essos are locked in a brutal game for power, while supernatural forces seem destined to shake the very fabric of George's world as we get closer and closer to the end of the story. All of this creates a really ripe product for speculation and prediction. There are thousands of essays and complicated theories that foretell what will happen in season 8 and The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. But we all know that they can't all be right. So today, we're going to discuss the game of speculation and the game of prediction, why fans enjoy it, what makes it unique to this fandom, why it can be problematic, and how it got started. In addition, we're going to do some predicting of our own, and we're going to talk about setting our expectations as we first discuss the season 7 finale, The Dragon and the Wolf, and contemplate how the show may end in season 8, and maybe a little bit of where the final 2 volumes of the book saga go. But first, we have a special guest with us to discuss this topic, our third guest on the Planetos podcast, and that would be Kyle Ross. And Kyle is here today to play this game of prediction and speculation with us. Kyle, welcome to the Planetos podcast.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Really excited to get to sit down and talk about some Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire. So it should be a good time.
Well, thank you, Kyle, for reaching out. We really appreciate it. Kyle was one of the first followers on our Twitter account, and we're a small podcast. We're growing every day. We thank you all for listening and being involved. But as we've said in our other podcast, our goal here is to catalog some of the fan experiences, some of the fan stories. So, Kyle, one of the things we do is we tell our Song of Ice and Fire story. And again, you're our third guest, and we've had a couple others on that have told their stories. Brett and I have told our story. So we want you to tell your Song of Ice and Fire story, where you came or how you came to the books, to the show, what you love about the fandom. You have a favorite book, a favorite episode, a favorite character, a favorite storyline. Tell us a little bit about that. And then give us a little bit more about yourself and maybe some of the other things that you love.
Yeah, sure. So I thought, again, like you said, I had seen you guys on Twitter, and one of the things I thought was really cool was this idea of everybody getting to share their Song of Ice and Fire story, because there's so many different people that have come to love this story, whether it's through the shows or the books. And I thought it was cool. I got to listen to your episode with Patrick, and I thought I'd be a good foil to come on after him, because because, it's, for somebody who, at least in some capacity, has been involved in the fandom for so many years and who's written so many essays, I was certainly more of a latecomer to Game of Thrones. I'd heard things for years about the show, but had never sat down and watched it or anything like that until October of 2015, I guess. Would have been my senior year of college. That a friend of mine was watching the show. He was just bugging me, telling me this is something I know you will like. Just sit down and watch the first couple of episodes with me. And he finally caught me one night when I wasn't really doing anything, and we sat down. And I mean, pretty immediately, probably 15, 20 minutes into the show, I was like, okay, yeah, this is, I can get on board with this for sure. I think what was cool about it for me, I've been a big fantasy guy pretty much my entire life. But what was cool about Game of Thrones is you have these elements of fantasy, but it's really instantly relatable because it's so grounded in realism, which is a verbiage you hear about the show all the time. But it really is, because especially towards the beginning of the show, it's really comes off more of a alternate history than even fantasy. Outside of the very first scene of the season in the prologue of the first book. But you can relate to these characters because you recognize this medieval Europe kind of style. So you fall into these storylines and these characters really quickly. So I think the first time while watching the show where I mean, and it's a big one for everybody, was watching the Red Wedding. The night that I was going to, yeah. I've heard so many different people say. David and Dan famously say, or I forget which one it was, but I think it was David who, when he read it in the books, had decided that he really wanted to pursue maybe making a show about it. But I had finished watching season 3, episode 7, and was gonna turn in for the night. So it's getting late. I had class in the morning, and my friend that I was watching it with was a couple episodes ahead of me, so knew, of course, what happened, and kind of looked at me and was like, please watch the next episode with me, man. So we sat down and watched that, and then of course you're not gonna watch the Red Wedding and then go to bed. So
yeah,
yeah, not yeah. So we watched the next one, and we're still hyped up. So we watch a few more, and then you get to season 4, episode 2, Lion in the Rose, where of course Joffrey dies at the very end of the episode. And again, you're like, oh my gosh, I guess I'm just not getting sleep tonight. Let's keep going. So it's not a good show to watch before you go to bed. I don't think Game of Thrones would be recommended for that. But I can remember watching through the show when I finished season 5. I remember that the last scene of the season where Jon Snow's been stabbed and is dying in the snow with blood pooling around him, and then the credits cut, and I got up, drove to Barnes and Noble, and bought the books. They said, okay, there's books about these. I'll sit down and read them now. And that's where I started really, you watch the show through once, which is, I mean, has brought so many people to the story, and you get to find out as you read and you become more part of the fandom that the rabbit hole goes so much deeper than just one watch through of the show. So I read all the books pretty quickly. Really, really, really liked them. I actually liked the fact that I had seen the show because the books are so dense that it was kind of helpful to at least you have an idea about some of these characters, so less of it goes over your head. So I rather like that aspect of it. I read the books pretty quickly, and then started getting into watching YouTube videos. I think Alt Shift X for me was the first one that was I really liked. I think he makes really high quality videos that piece together some of the more popular theories that you're going to see out there. So I always think his are worth a watch. Then started getting into the the Radio Westeroses and the Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire, and so many good podcasts are out there, as well as starting to participate in Twitter, Reddit, and the fan forums, where you really start to see these people that just have so many crazy cool ideas. So being a part of the fandom for me has been really fun. The quick aside about me, and this is something I've always thought about Game of Thrones, so that when I was watching through the first time, something that I thought about, I grew up right in the Harry Potter demographic. I was pretty much the age of the characters of that book as they were coming out. And I always kind of felt that for Game of Thrones, not that like George's work was already out and a literary success at this point, of course.
Yeah.
But you had this generation of kids that grew up reading a fantasy series and being a part of a fandom and waiting for the next book to come out and the next movie to come out. And then in 2011, a lot of these kids have grown up to be, they're 17, 18 years old now and are ready to kind of move on to a different, maybe more adult fandom, and Game of Thrones hits. And you had an audience that was really ready to latch on to the show. Of course, it already had a huge audience from the books. The show kind of blew that up and brought in a more mainstream audience. But as a Harry Potter and the inheritance cycle was another big one for me. But I think you had like a captive audience that was kind of trained in already being a part of a fantasy fandom that was able to latch onto it really quickly. So that's kind of just something I always thought of in regards
to
that.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, that's a little bit of my background with the with the Game of Thrones in the books.
Well, great. That's an awesome story. I think when we talk to people on this podcast, but when you're just interacting with other folks, or you're thinking about your history in the fandom, your personal story, I always come back to this thing I call escalation. That when you watch that first episode and Bran is pushed from the window, you're like, oh, that's this kind of show. And then Viserys is killed. Oh, that's this kind of show. And then Robert Baratheon is killed. Oh, it just keeps building and building. And you're right. It's like an addiction. I mean, here we are on a podcast talking about it on a Friday night. I'm sure we, three grown men. But it's something. Yeah.
That's why.
But it's something that just keeps you going, because each new chapter is something different and something new. Each new episode gives you something different, something new, and I think you're right about that it just hooks you like nothing else. I mean, I think we all have a lot of things, other movies and other books that we love and adore, but we're not podcasting about that. We're not on the internet talking about it, and so I think you're right. This is, and I do agree with you that Harry Potter demographic is certainly, I'm sure, something that the series has benefited from. But I think there's a lot of people just from walks of life that don't even like fantasy that can buy into this because of that, gritty realism that it displays.
Yeah, definitely. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing. Yeah, I didn't have anything to say.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said, I think it's a compartment of that. But Game of Thrones, I mean, you have military history people that love the show and people that don't like fantasy, and it really is something for everybody. Kind of because it's built around that point of view. There's different characters. There's something for everybody. I think that's a big point of it.
Kyle, do you have a particular favorite episode, favorite book, character, plot arc?
Yeah, so I think my favorite book will kind of probably upset some people. I really liked Feast for Crows, which when it came out was met. Of course, people were. You guys, I think, said it on one of the previous episodes. Where's Jon and where's Dany and Tyrion and these main characters. But I like the characters in Feast for Crow. I like reading Dan and Jaime and Cersei and these other storylines. So I really liked Feast for Crows. As far as episode, I really liked season 6, and Winds of Winter. I thought was for as much that they wanted to put into that episode, the beginning sequence is so well done with the music at the beginning, it overlaid over it, and whether that event happens in the books or not is another discussion. But I think the episode's really good. I think the reveal of the Tower of Joy is really well done. I think that's always been. There's another episode that you watch it on a Sunday night and you're like, great, I have to go to bed and go to work in the morning now. No, but yeah, so I thought that was a good one. Hard Home's really good. There's a lot of good episodes in this.
There certainly are.
I like the fact that there's so many different people, in this fandom, and they all focus. Usually, they all focus on like a specific part of the books. Like you got LML, and he does the astronomy and
And the
Right.
myth.
and the
Yeah.
myths, yeah. And then you got Brendan B. Fish. I think he likes the wars and well, I guess wars and politics.
Right. Sure.
But and then the list goes on. But I really do enjoy that there's
Yeah,
just
there's something for everyone in this fandom, and we're hoping in the future, Kyle, to focus on some of the music, and I think that there's people out there that really not that they just enjoy it, but George has written some really great songs that convey a lot of depth and a lot of background for the series in general. But you're right, you can pull a lot out of this story. And I love one of the things I really love about the fandom is there are these, like, we all have these very minor characters that we just for some reason latch to, and just somehow kind of feature in our minds all the time. Like, I always laugh. I don't know if you listen to Girls Going Canon, but I love Strong Belwas. I don't know why, but I just do, and I love that Eliana just constantly brings him up on there, because when I first read about him, and of course he first appears in the Clash of Kings, but just the fact that there's this big brute of a man and he's got a little vest on. And I just think that's funny.
Yeah, I love that's a nice thing sometimes about these characters you haven't seen in the show too, is like for whatever reason a detail really sticks out to you in the
Yes.
book and they look a certain way to you and it's it just kind of sticks in your head. Strong Bellis is definitely a good one. I can definitely close my eyes and see him kind of chugging along with the little drape on and
Yeah. That's a great story. Again, thank you for sharing it, and thanks for joining us tonight. I think it's time we probably just need to jump right in to this episode. We've got a lot to discuss tonight, but I'm going to do something. I'm going to put us on the spot here. We're going to talk about predictions and speculation. So, there's been some recent news from some of the HBO executives. The main one is that season 8 is going to premiere in the first half of next year, which I think is great. Thankfully, we don't have to wait till a year from now. So
right.
we're looking at anywhere from 6 to 10 or 11 months that the show should be back on. So, Kyle, we're going to put you on the spot first, and then Brett, I'm going to ask you the same question.
All right.
You can be as specific or as general as you want to be, but when do you think the show is going to premiere next year? And remember, this is recorded, so we can always go back and make fun of you if you're wrong.
So I think I saw the news the other day, of course, too, where they say for first half, right? And that's a good thing. I'm gonna say April. They've released in April in the past, and it's still, kind of in that first half mark still. So yeah, I'm gonna say probably like around April. I'm gonna say April 25th.
Now,
Well,
now I'm like looking at the calendar, making sure
No, I
that's
don't know if that's a Sunday, right?
okay. Hold on, I'm gonna pull up the calendar here.
yeah, I want to, yeah.
You were close, Kyle. So you have the option of either April 21st or 28th.
I'll go April 28th. Yeah.
28th. Okay.
Day
Well,
before my girlfriend's birthday.
There you go.
well, I did not hear that news, but I had the same idea as you, Kyle. I saw that it's typically released in April. So, but I say I think it'll be released early in April.
Hope
Um,
you're right.
yes, I hope I am too. Now, hold on, let me look at the calendar here, and I'll predict an actual date. I'm thinking the 7th of
The
April.
7th. Okay. All right. I will probably split the difference here, and I'll go with. I think I'll go with April 14th.
Be happy to be wrong on that one.
All right, so there we've done our first prediction of the night. Audience, be prepared. We're going to do some more predictions here in just a minute, but let's set some parameters here as we move forward. So This was discussed on another podcast recently, but there's a lot of theories out there. We read them daily, and sometimes you read a theory and you just think that's not going to happen. Sometimes you read a theory that you never imagined, and you think, oh my God, how did I never figure this out before? How am I just seeing this theory? So first, we want to talk about predictions and speculation in the context of what seems right and what feels right. So, if let's take Brienne's arc in the Winds of Winter, perhaps. What seems right? Well, there's a lot of speculation. I still, to this day, even when looking at some of the possibilities for the Winds of Winter, you can imagine what's going to happen in the North, even if it's 10 different scenarios. Same thing with Old Town, same thing with Marine. Brienne, to me, and her arc with Jaime and Lady Stoneheart is really hard to figure out. But what seems right? So, one of the possibilities, I'm just going to throw this out there, but what seems right is we know Brienne has again sworn herself to help Lady Stoneheart, but she's also has a great respect and a love for Jaime Lannister, and she wants to make sure he probably survives. So what seems right could be that Brienne carries out an order for Lady Stoneheart, and then somehow she tries to help Jaime escape. So, that's just a small example of something that seems right, and that seems right in the context of making a theory. And so usually those are lined with evidence, textual evidence, character development, plot arc. You can look at the books, you can look at some of the things George has said about that character, and you can say, okay, this seems right for the character. What feels right? Those can be themes. Those can be, this is a theme that George is going for in the development of this character, or in this particular book or whatever. So if we keep Brienne as our example here, Brienne wants to fulfill her vows, and we know she made a vow at one time to Catelyn, but she also, again, has a deep admiration for Jaime, and she considers him a friend, maybe even a little more. So she's probably going to want to try and do something that protects him. So again, that feels right. Again, some predictions don't feel right. Some things don't seem right. Doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's just that we've got to look at them through those lens. The second thing that we've got to do is we've got to set expectations. And we see this in a lot of other fandoms, that fans create a theory or an idea, they speculate, and they become so beholden to that idea that they can't see any differing opinions, or they can't, if it doesn't happen. Pat said this on episode 3, especially in the context of the show. If the show doesn't do something that you think is going to happen, you say, oh, well, the show just doesn't understand the material like I do. So you got to set your expectations. I have a personal expectation about the Valonqar. My personal expectation is that I want to see Tyrion kill Cersei, because Cersei is wrong almost about everything. I would like for her to be right in that moment about her fear of Tyrion. But I'm perfectly happy if Jaime kills Cersei, which I think is probably the vast majority of fans believe that Jaime will do it, because that makes narrative sense. That makes poetic sense. So go back to that. What feels right? What seems right? Jaime came into the world clinging his hands to Cersei's ankle. It makes poetic sense that she goes out of this world with his hands wrapped around her neck. So set your expectations. Have fun theorizing, have fun speculating, but don't let it shut you off to other ideas, other theories. This is a fantasy world. We want to have fun with it, and George has given us so much to have fun with. So you guys are back on the spot here. Let's talk about why do fans, it's not just Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones fans, but why do fans enjoy speculating and predicting so much? Brett, I'm going to throw this to you first.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's just fun. It's fun to do. The book. Who knows when the series is going to be finished and you get bragging rights. Yeah, I think there's a lot of loose ends that need to be tied up, and that's what it you know we want those answered, and we think we'll get them. We'll have those answered, but also George likes to be ambiguous too. So a lot of a lot of these theories are gonna maybe answer these questions that George may not, and make you aware of it. So
Right. I like that. It's ambiguous. It can be multiple answers. There can be multiple end games, and he's designed it specifically for that purpose
yeah,
because he doesn't want to reveal a lot. Kyle, what do you think about why there's so much speculating and predicting in this fandom? Why do fans enjoy it?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this, and then I think Tyrion and Jamie, the Valonqar is a really good way to look at it, like you brought up. But I think people love narrative, whether it's sports or literature or politics, people become engaged around a certain storyline or a narrative around a person. And what speculation allows us as fans to do is, in some sense, we become a part of that narrative because we take agency in participating in this world, whether it's books or shows or whatever it is, podcasting, making YouTube videos. Then, as that speculation spreads, everything that we talk about as fans becomes that narrative around certain character story arcs and events that might happen. We write essays and talk on podcasts for endless hours about theories and topics. And eventually, within our own little zeitgeist, we create that narrative. And it's just really fun to be a part of because we have agency within the fandom. Uh, so with Jamie and Tyrion, I think the Valonqar is such a good example because you can make counter arguments as to why it would fit narratively for both,
Mm.
and both how George likes to write prophecy. On one hand, George's prophecy is often a character misinterpreting something and then being hit by what they would least expect. So from Cersei, Jamie, her entire life has been this person. I mean, like you said, they came into the world together. They shared a womb. They were lovers. They have had 3 children together. uh, so from that sense, you're like, if you read these books very quickly, of course they grow apart. But that seems like she thinks it's Tyrion. It's her other little brother, Jamie. That seems
Hmm.
like I write it that way. On the other hand, George loves prophecies to be these things that you fight and rage against, only to you be the agent that makes it happen. So with Tyrion, and you have mentioned this before, uh, she treats Tyrion so poorly and hates him because she, at some level, believes he's the Valonqar. And if he were to kill her, she would have been the one who creates that outcome. So both of those things fit into how George likes to write prophecy. So it's like there's really strong arguments for either one, and I could see either. And we sit and we read over these books for so long too that like when we have this big gap, everybody's now like, oh, it's Jamie, it's Jamie, it's Jamie, and now it seems like that's the norm. Whereas
Hmm.
didn't have that gap, you might just think there wouldn't be this zeitgeist of people saying that over and over again. So it's a tough one to say because you can really see both sides of it.
I think on I don't know, the show kind of confuses me because Cersei couldn't. So in the Dragon and the Wolf, like Cersei kind of she almost has Gregor kill Tyrion and Jamie.
Yeah, I was
So
worried.
yeah, and both of those scenes, like you really think it's going to happen, and she wasn't able to pull the trigger on it. So I that does kind of confuse me, and what would cause either one of them to actually go as far to kill her in the show. And that yeah, I'm a little bit confused by that, and so it may not be either of them because they are
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
because
Right.
Cersei I think still has a love for Tyrion in the show, and I think in the books no, I think
Right. I
absolutely
agree.
not.
Yeah, yeah, same.
Yeah, Cersei, I mean, is definitely a a much different character in uh, the show. A great character in both in both the books and the show, but different motivations, different. She's a lot smarter in the show than she is in the books.
Yeah.
So I think as we talk here, obviously it's the way George writes that leaves speculation and theorizing and predicting open. We don't criticize on this episode, or on this podcast, but there has been a long gap between the last book and the next book. That obviously contributes to it because this community continues to grow. So you're adding new people who are, just finding theories or just coming up with theories or ideas on their own. And so that obviously contributes to it. The fact that we don't have new material, or the material that we're getting is historical in nature, like with Fire and Blood coming up. But if we look back at the start of this community, in 96, when the first book was published, and I'm not sure how long after that the Westeros.org website started, but people started chatting online about this. They started posting theories and speculating. So we know this goes back to the inception of the story with the publication in 96. What about problems with speculating and predicting? We talked a little bit about that a little bit ago, and I want to jump back to a word we used earlier, escalation, because Kyle, you pointed out that let's stay with the Valonqar, that Jaime's really kind of oh well, that's who's going to be, because most people, I think, believe that now, but that started somewhere. That theory started somewhere, and then grew and kind of became the norm. And part of it is not having the material. So you begin theorizing, people begin to add nuance, or, oh, read this chapter. This is a foreshadowing for Jaime. Oh, did you think about this quote? Again, there's an escalation that some of these theories become fact when they're not yet. So talk about what can be, and I'll ask you to start, Kyle. What can be problematic with theorizing and speculating and predicting?
Yeah, so I'll go back a little bit. You talk about the gaps between the books, and I mean I want the Winds of Winter out tomorrow just as much as the next person. But one really cool thing that has happened due to these gaps is the fandom has become as active as it is, and I think that's why it is so active. Is because we've had these books for so long, where I mean, like you said, from whenever you want to call Westeros.org came up, 98, 90, whatever you want to call it, 20 years worth of speculation. And now we've had the last book for 6, 7 years now, to go over things. So we can, it's really fun to be a part of. And part of that reason is because the story is not over. If we had those answers, we couldn't sit here and podcast about what the answers could be,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, problem wise, it's George's problem, unfortunately, and the showrunner's problem. Man, it's got to be hard to be a writer when you've got really smart people and so many smart people out there writing, book long essays about a character where they're taking every single line that has their name mentioned it throughout all of your books and piecing these things together, and they have enough time to do it because the books have taken longer to write. As a writer, you're like, great, you figured it out, good job. Now I have to write it for you. So that's problematic from a writing standpoint. It's problematic from our standpoint as fans too, because it's so easy to get lost in. There's one quote about, they call somebody a dragon in a sentence. So you're like, oh, they must be a Targaryen, and I have this other sentence that showed they might have been in this general area during this time period. So they're probably going to write a dragon at one point. It's really easy when you have all these bits of text to piece something together. So the theorizing can kind of snowball over itself. I think that's where it gets problematic from a theorizing standpoint. But it's not really a problem because it's really fun to do anyway. So
Right. Yeah, I sometimes and since you've listened to our podcast thus far, Kyle, hopefully we're not putting you on the spot here. We should have asked you before to swear allegiance to the one true king, Stannis Baratheon. However, sometimes when I'm talking about Stannis on Facebook or Twitter, there's a lot of people who love Stannis. There's a lot of people who hate Stannis. There's very, very few in the middle with that character. But I instantly sometimes get I got into not an argument, but a discussion one time with someone who immediately just started saying, Stannis is never going to set the throne. You just need to get over it. And I said, I didn't say that. I never once said that. Like, Stannis is doomed to die. I understand that. So like you said, even when you're interacting with other fans, because of some of the interactions they've had with other fans or theories or whatever, they kind of put up barriers at times, and that can be problematic. But that's always fun. I always try to, I'm someone who I see myself sometimes as a mediator. I want to bring people together and be like, no, this is a fantasy character. I really love him. I wish he was actually the ruler of the earth, but that's not going to happen. So,
can I address Stannis real quick?
Absolutely, please.
So
is this where we have to cut you off?
No. Good thing. Good. So when you watch the show through first, of course, I think the first time you see Stannis with Melisandre, it comes off very evil's not the right word,
right?
But like
ominous.
Sketchy. You're like, ominous is a better. Yeah, that's a good word for it. So you as a viewer, I feel like don't really ever trust Stannis, and then you feel proven right, of course, by the end of the story that Stannis has made mistakes. But then you read the books and you see Stannis, and you're like, you know what? I keep agreeing with him. Like when you get to see more of him, and I think in the books he comes off much more where you're like, you know what? This guy would make a good king. He's certainly portrayed very differently between the two. They're different stories and different mediums, but
right.
I think definitely if you read the books, and I think a lot of show watchers don't always get that Stannis in the books is very, very different from that standpoint.
Yeah, my wife she simply cannot understand why I like Stannis Baratheon so much. She's a show watcher, and she's just like, why? I just don't get this. I'm like, but like from the first chapter, you get the story of Proudwing, and there's a lot of nuance to it. And she's like, what the fuck is Proudwing? So, and my wife does not cuss, but I always add curse words to the way she talks to me sometimes. So, so Brett, what do you see as problematic sometimes with speculating and prediction in this fandom?
Yeah, I don't really think a lot of it's problematic. I mean, I guess if someone's just taking something that's not well grounded and just running with it and causing people to latch onto that idea, that that's kind of a problem.
Yeah. So back to that, what seems right, what feels right, and we again, if you're looking at your theory out there and you're saying, oh well, maybe mine doesn't seem right or feel right, these guys don't like me, that's not what we're saying. We're just simply saying that when you're theorizing, you gotta have a little bit of foundation to back up what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think there's a few podcasters that are really out there and take something and run with it, and they kind of ignore stuff that Martin has said, and and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because they're bringing something else to the table, but they're kind of if you're ignoring certain parts of something, then you're not going to get you're not going to that's not going to happen, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Well, and to be fair, so let's just jump on that for a minute. So social media, these large fandoms that are now interacting on a daily basis with each other, we've had a lot of instances over the course of Game of Thrones, over the course of Star Wars, Star Trek, all these, that the producers and directors, Westworld, the producers and directors and creators, they know the fans are going to get things right. And they know that these fans are very devoted and very intelligent. But even with that, there are some creators out there who are saying, look, Jon Snow's not coming back. Kit Harington, he's done on the show. Just get over it. People saying that on Westworld, that we're taking it completely different. Yeah, we're leaking the plot or whatever, but we don't want you to read it or whatever. I think J.J. Abrams in that terrible Star Trek Into Darkness, is like, oh, it's not Khan. It's not Khan. The same thing they did with I think it was the last James Bond movie. That's not Blofeld. I think it was Spectre, Daniel Craig's last. That's not Blofeld. Well, he ended up being Blofeld. That ended up being Khan. Jon Snow came back. I mean, all these things. So I think sometimes some fans look at creators and think, well, they don't want to give away the answer. They want people to enjoy the medium. They want people to sit at their TV and be blown away by what happens. They want people to open the book and read it. I completely get what you're saying. I think you're right, though. I don't think George is doing that.
Yeah, I don't think he's like that. He tends to answer some of the like he just answered the cat's paw mystery like out of nowhere, and I thought the whole time that it was Littlefinger. I thought Littlefinger was I thought what I thought is the cat's paw was saying you weren't supposed to be here to Catelyn because
Littlefinger didn't want him.
Didn't
want her killed.
Yeah, and Littlefinger has spies everywhere, I'm sure, and so does Varys. So I think Varys was instantly supposed to be a red herring too. But yeah, I was completely convinced it was Littlefinger, and then up until like a few months ago when I heard someone say something about it on a podcast, I was like, what? And so I had to go look it up because the show kind of made it seem like it was Littlefinger as well in that trial, in his trial. So yeah.
The show definitely doesn't. You only get it kind of cryptically in the books, even. You really have to. I mean, yes, they tell you like, it was Joffrey, but you're still kind of like, yeah, but like, was it? Like,
yeah,
are you
yeah,
sure?
and yeah, and like the only thing you get from it is Cersei and Jaime. Aren't they talking about it at one point, like to each other in the books? I can't remember. I think so though, but yeah. So I think George he'll answer some of the smaller mysteries, and then if you're onto something or he doesn't want to give something away, he just won't answer you. He doesn't flat out lie. So
That'd be interesting. That's one of his go-tos. He can answer these questions very cryptically in a way that is non-definitive. He can say it'd be an interesting idea if this were to happen, and it's an answer non-answer sort of thing. Where you're like, well, that doesn't mean it's going to happen, even if he said it's a good idea.
Yeah.
You never know what George is thinking. But yeah, you make a good point. I think the thing with theorizing in the fandom, and it's always good to talk about certain things, but we do take details from mainly the books and certainly to some extent the shows, details that can be like proven in an argument. Well, we know that Jon Snow is Rhaegar and Lyanna's son. Well, we know now, but when the theory was put together, there was so much context and details from throughout the books that fit narrative and all these reasons why it was so. Where when you have these theories, you see a theory come across your news feed and you read it and you're like, people have definitively disproven this with details numerous times. We don't need to talk about it anymore. Is different. So there are levels of theories, and there are certain amounts of tinfoil you have to put on your head when you talk about certain things.
Right.
But they're still really fun to talk about. I think that's the thing in this fandom is you have to be willing to say like, well, let's assume we go down this path and talk about it because it's fun to consider, even if you don't necessarily believe that. You have to be able to kind of put yourself into different hats to have the discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I had something to add to that, but I forgot it.
All right.
Let's just move on.
So, now that we've discussed, we've laid some of the parameters for theorizing. We've talked about it in the context of the fandom. We've set our expectations. We want to move into season 8. We want to talk about where we think season 8 is going. And we're going to do that first by jumping back and doing a quick synopsis and review on The Dragon and the Wolf, the season finale to season 7. So let's do some background on that episode, and then we'll do a quick synopsis and go from there. So, Kyle, you talked earlier about The Winds of Winter being one of your favorite episodes, and according to a recent survey released by Watchers on the Wall, that is the #1 episode. And we'll link that in the show notes because I think it's a pretty interesting article. And actually, it was. Sorry, were you saying something?
Nope, I just agreeing.
Oh, okay. So at the recent Con of Thrones, I think what Sue Miller did, the editor of Watchers on the Wall, and I think founder as well, they did a survey there, and then it got blasted out to the fandom on Reddit and Twitter and everything else, and you could rank it. So The Dragon and the Wolf. The Dragon and the Wolf is ranked 22 out of 67 episodes, so that's in the top 1/3 of all the episodes. Earned an 8.3 in the survey, and was second best episode that season, right behind The Spoils of War. So let's talk about The Dragon and the Wolf. So everybody remembers that awesome opening where there's a convention in King's Landing and everyone's invited. Everyone. Pretty much everyone. Okay, Sansa, Bran, Arya, and I'm missing someone. And I specifically thought about there was a fourth person. Oh, Littlefinger. Are not. Oh, Sam and Gilly. They're on the road to Winterfell. So they're the 6 people that are not in King's Landing. So we all know their goal at the Dragon Pit meeting is to put aside their differences and unite to fight the army of the dead. The Hound sees Brienne again. He threatens his brother. We're getting Clegane Bowl in season 8, ladies and gentlemen, and there are reunions for everyone. Cersei obviously arrives late to the party and then is fashionably upstaged by Daenerys Targaryen. Things aren't going well during the negotiation for Tyrion and Jon and Dany. And so Cersei is shown what is coming for them all. A white. It's shocking. Euron Greyjoy pieces out. Cersei accepts the truce, but she first sets a condition that the king in the north, the Honorable Ned Stark's son, will take no sides in the wars to come. Jon, however, has pledged his allegiance to House Targaryen, unbeknownst to everyone else, and Cersei leaves. She's done with this negotiation. And after that, Tyrion admonishes Jon for not being able to tell one little white lie to get everyone on the same side. So Tyrion goes to the Queen's chambers to try and make it right with his sister, and she reveals to him subtly that she is pregnant. Tyrion understands that Cersei's going to do anything she can to protect her child, and so he appeals to her as a mother. Jon and Dany are sharing a special moment in the Dragon Pit, and good news, Tyrion and Cersei re-enter the Dragon Pit, and not only has she agreed to the truce, but she's going to provide armies to fight the White Walkers. Now back at Winterfell, Sansa receives word that Jon has bent the knee to Dany, and Littlefinger begins sowing the seeds of discontent within House Stark. On Dragonstone, Jon and Dany begin their plans to march their troops north. Jorah thinks Dany should fly north. Jon thinks they should arrive together by boat. and then march to Winterfell in a show of solidarity. So, surprised, Dany decides to go via boat. Theon and Jon have a very candid and inspiring talk, which I think is one of the best scenes of that episode. Theon then gets his ass kicked, but then beats the shit out of that guy and yells for Yara, and everyone cheers. So they're going to free his sister. Atop Winterfell's walls, Sansa looks like a Stark as she ponders out on the white winter of North, and she orders Arya to be brought to the Great Hall before her and Bran. They pull a fast one on Lord Baelish, who squirms and squeals like a little mouse. They lay out all of the conspiracies that Littlefinger has orchestrated, and his pleas are finally cut short when Arya slashes his throat open with the Valyrian dagger that once cut Catelyn's hands as she protected Bran. Back in King's Landing, Jaime is giving commands when he is interrupted by Cersei, who stops him and tells him that she never planned to help Dany and Jon. But Jaime made a vow, and he's done breaking oaths. She tells him that no, Euron Greyjoy did not go back to the Iron Islands. In fact, he went to Essos to pick up the Golden Company. Jaime decides to walk away from Cersei after she tells him that no one walks away from me. And as Jaime rides off, a snowflake falls onto his golden hand. Winter has finally come to the south, and Ramin Djawadi delivers a haunting rendition of the main theme as the cold descends upon the capital. Sam and Gilly finally make it to Winterfell, and Sam goes to speak with Bran. Sam tells him what he's discovered in Old Town, that Rhaegar and Lyanna were wed, and Jon would therefore be a legitimate son of the two. Bran weirwoods back to the past, and we see the secret wedding. Meanwhile, on SS Loveboat, Dany gets a knock at her door. Then Jon literally knocks her clothes off, and his name is Aegon Targaryen. You have to protect him. Promise me, Ned. Hot sex scene continues, and Tyrion stares forlornly at what's happening behind closed doors. Sansa and Arya are finally united again as sisters, and Bran is traveling by Raven to Eastwatch by the Sea, where the amazing duo, we need to see more of them together, Tormund Giantsbane and Beric Dondarrion, they're just watching and waiting for something to happen, and wouldn't you know it, here come the White Walkers. And they have an ice dragon, which literally blows shit up. The wall cracks into a million pieces, it crashes down, and the army of the dead spills over the ancient threshold toward Winterfell and our cast of heroes. But it's okay, Tormund and Beric will be fine. All right.
It's a whited dragon, not an ice dragon.
That's you're right. I apologize. I like the term ice dragon better, so people better start using that. And I literally, like, you can ask my wife, I rewound the sex scene multiple times because I was like, well, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand this scene, honey.
Right?
As much as you talked about Jon Snow's ass in the first episode.
Yes, it's nice. Come on. Did you see the little, like, there's a it's like, I don't know if it's like a Greek symbol or something, but some math equation that someone like put his ass and it's just like perfect. Anyways, I've talked way too much about this. All right, and so
Game of Thrones has always had good production, right?
Yes, yes, and even if that ass is fake, it was a amazing set piece. So, wow, we're gonna have to edit this a lot.
No, that's gotta go in.
No, this is going in. Yeah. This is.
All right, so we're gonna throw out a few questions here, specifically about this episode, and then we'll move into what we think is going to happen next season. So, is Jon's name Aegon in the books?
I think so. Because Lyanna probably knew that baby Aegon died, and she, I think, she probably wanted to name her son Aegon. The Conqueror. If she believed in Rhaegar's obsession about having three heads of the dragon and all that, whatever, all that stuff, all that good stuff. I think she probably did. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Kyle?
It's a good question because I think when you first hear it, you're like, wait a minute, what? Like, how, why is that? But you're gonna get me started on Rhaegar here, which is always a good rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
I think there could be some context that it makes sense why Rhaegar wanted whoever he believed would be the prince that was promised to be named Aegon. I've always kind of felt that instances where it seems like Rhaegar had information that we actually don't even have yet as
Mm.
readers or viewers, just in his actions, sometimes don't match up with what we're told about him from people who knew him, and it really seems like maybe he did know a couple more things that, or he believed at least a couple things that we have not become privy to yet. And one of them certainly could be that he read a tome when he was a child that made him believe he would be Azor Ahai. It's possible that there was something in there indicating this name of Aegon, or he learned that later in his life, uh, that name has some sort of significant importance. It seems very candid of George if we say that it happens in the books, that it would make sense that if Rhaegar has named his firstborn son, who he believed would be Azor Ahai, Aegon, ends up being incorrect about it, and he thinks it must be this one because I'm sure about that Aegon detail. That's assuming that that's the case. It seems like a big detail for them to change.
Mm.
Also,
Mm.
I mean, if they've had a lot of information from George, we know that they know at least major details of the ending. John's name seems like a big detail that they didn't know about. And then if they didn't know about the name, Aegon would have been a pretty bold move of them to say, we'll call him Aegon. I feel like they would have, if they didn't know, they would have, Jaehaerys, there was a popular theory that would have been it.
Right.
There were other names they couldn't have done. It seems strange they would have chosen that name if they didn't know it would have been the name in the books, even if it
Right.
does seem strange that Rhaegar named two of his children Aegon. So
Sure.
I
Yeah.
think it will be.
And they combine characters and from in the books with and they give those traits to they pass those traits off onto certain characters that are on the TV show, like Euron using an axe, and that's something Victarion would do, not Euron in the books. But I don't think they did that here.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you. And John is such I mean, I know there's people out there that don't think this, or they think that he's so tropey or whatever, but he's an important character. He's, and we're going to talk about this here in just a little bit, but George told one of the first season directors that this story is really about John and Danny. And that first season director, of course, kind of looked at him like, well, I thought this was about Ned Stark, which, everyone who reads the first book thinks, oh, well, here's your main character. Here's who we're going to follow the whole time. And then he dies. And, George has been setting it up this way. But I agree with you, I, and I actually, I've always wanted John's real name to be Jaehaerys. I think that,
I like
Jaehaerys,
that.
he was a great king. I think John would be a great king, all of that. But I grow more and more convinced that it probably is Aegon. That's, there's the convenience of Aegon or Phaegon or Aegon the Sixth, however you want to refer to him, not being in the show, that gives you this convenience of saying, oh, well, this is just a consolidation. I just can't see that because John is so important. Like, even if some of these nuances don't work out specifically in the books, to me, this is an important thing. I mean, this is something that John's going to very much struggle with if he ever finds out, his true heritage, that he's a Targaryen. He's gonna battle back and forth with being a Stark or a Targaryen, or trying to do both. He's going to have to contemplate all this. And to me, his name is important. Aegon the Conqueror. It's destiny, if you will. And I know that destiny is sometimes looked down upon in these books, but remember, this is a fantasy story. George likes those tropes, even if he does them a little differently. But I think you're right, Kyle, about the Rhaegar thing. Rhaegar is someone that that we think we know a lot about, but he's a very secondary character because he's talked about usually by secondary characters, mainly. You know, Danny doesn't remember him, so she's not able to provide a lot of information. It's Barristan Selmy. It's, you know, Ned doesn't think much about him. It's Robert talking about him. It's Cersei thinking about him. It's Oberyn. You know, it's all these people talking about John Connington. You know, we definitely get a lot more with John Connington in A Dance with Dragons. But like you said, we don't know why Rhaegar did the things he did. We know that he was told something probably by the Ghost of High Heart. We know that he had some type of plan to either take out his father or change things in the realm. We know that all of a sudden he made an abrupt change in his life to become a warrior and to read prophecy and all these things. So something happened somewhere. So I think it would be important. I do agree with you to an extent, Brett, that either Lyanna could have known that it was Rhaegar's intention to name his Aegon, or she thought, you know, this is what Rhaegar would want, or she just did it out of respect. I think that's a perfectly conceivable possibility. So, you know, I think, and you know, now it's kind of Aegon, Jon. You know, that's kind of a little twist where Jon could be could be a derivative of Aegon, not just, you know, a name in honor of Jon Arryn. You know, again, the Honorable Ned Stark would probably come up with some notion like that to be like, well, I'm not really betraying Lyanna and Rhaegar. I'm just kind of playing with the name a little bit there.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything else on Jon's name?
So I really like the fact that it would make a lot of sense book wise for his name to be Aegon too, because you've got Jon Snow, who grew up as a bastard, thinking he was a bastard, but his name's Aegon, and he's a Targaryen, and he's the rightful heir to Westeros. If you don't, if you don't include Stannis, but but then you got Griff, who thinks he's
Right.
Aegon Targaryen, and it's a good chance he's a Blackfyre. And and also I do like the Tyrion Targaryen theory, because if Tyrion grows up thinking he's a Lannister, and he's hanging out with young Griff, who thinks young Griff.
Well, okay.
And then, you know, there's a lot of the dragon stuff too in the first book, which is where you get most of the clues about Jon's parentage. So and it was supposed to be, you know, a trilogy. So I don't know. It just makes sense. I don't know if I'd really like it. Like, I don't know if I'd like it if Tyrion is a Targaryen, but there are a lot of clues in there that hint towards it. So
yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm not a huge fan of the Tyrion as a Targaryen theory. There are certainly enough clues for it to hold water. There's actually more and more every day. I feel like I'm like, damn it, this is gonna end up. But with the Jon's name, character consolidation is certainly a real thing. Would be really weird if they did character consolidation on Jon Snow, who we maybe were super misled, but we kind of know is the central axis of this story.
Right.
You would, oh, we'll just consolidate young Griff with, I don't know, doesn't seem to fit to me. The one other thing with Rhaegar that I'll try to do real quick is, you know, we know that his birth at Summerhall, King Aegon V had sent sorcerers to Ashai looking for books on how to rebirth dragons from these eggs that they had. You know, and they invite all the Targaryen camp down to Summerhall, which of course then ends up in the conflagration that kills the king and so many other Targaryens on the night of Rhaegar's birth, which of course fills him potentially being Azor Ahai with the, you know, salt from the people crying
the tears,
at the tears and the smoke in the air, and the Ghost of High Heart tells us he was crying. But anyway, the point I would get to with the name is, you know, we're told that Rhaegar goes back to this place often. You know, it's one of the, I wouldn't say few details, but it's a detail we get about Rhaegar, is that he goes here and he plays his harp. And it's possible that I don't know if a tome or what would have survived this fire, but he could have had a dragon dream here, or found some sort of information that hasn't been shared with us. If if there was information brought back from a shy that they built this meeting around, he could have found something there that maybe made him. I don't know if the name quite fits in there, but at least provide some sort of context of where he got information from. It's
Yeah.
that's very wild speculation, but I can see at least something there.
Do you do you all think that Bran is boy? I wish Bran was, and I think he's going to be very important this next season. But I wish he had done a little more this past season. Um, do you think he is going to be the key in the Winds of Winter or even A Dream of Spring to kind of unlocking some of these mysteries? Is he going to be the one that sees this stuff? We're winning back to see Rhaegar or finding out more information. Is he going to be the key to do that?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think they're
Yeah, I
gonna.
mean, it's hard to imagine who else could do it. I mean,
Yeah.
we know John Connington knows Rhaegar, but he didn't know him like that.
and
Um,
and he's already kind of doing stuff like that.
right,
Look
right.
when he was looking through the tree at Winterfell, and he had all those visions.
Right.
So I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you all are right about that. That the show and the scenes. Let me be kind here to Bran. The show has done a nice job of with those scenes. Like you said, Kyle, that scene in The Winds of Winter where we finally get the first reveal of Jon Snow being the child of Lyanna. That was a very powerful scene. Very very memorable. But I like your point, Brett, about the possibility of two Aegons in the final two books. That makes a lot of this is based on historical precedents. And my God, we had hundreds of Edwards and Henrys and Johns and all this stuff in English history and French history as those different kings battled for the throne. It's also interesting that if which I think we agree that Dany's probably going to take out Aegon the Sixth, Aegon. And what happens if she then encounters another Aegon, and this guy has an even more legitimate claim to the throne? That's going to really fuck with her. That I slayed one Aegon, and now here's another one, and especially if they're either destined to come together or either as husband and wife or partners or they have to ally to defeat the others or whatever. That's going to really screw with her.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and it's gonna, and I think it might happen a little bit the same way as it does on the TV show. Like they're gonna probably get together, and then he's gonna find out later, and
Yeah,
maybe Sam might have something to do with that too.
that's true. That's a good point. He could find something at Old Town. All
Definitely.
right. So let's talk about the fall of the wall. How do you think it happens in the books? How do you, which character or characters or storyline affects it? And then when does it happen? When do you think it occurs in The Winds of Winter or A Dream of Spring? Kyle, we'll let you go first.
Sure. So I do think, and of course, we've seen major differences as the show has gone on relative to the book. Just as it's a butterfly effect. You change these little things, and they have to be very different as they go on. So not to harp on the show, I love the show, and I'm literally sitting in with excitement for the next season to come out. But in the books, I do think it'll be really different. I really subscribe to the theory that the Horn of Winter will bring the wall down,
Mm,
but I think there's an ice dragon inside of the wall, and we have a lot of material
hmm,
that can actually support this idea because, well, what we have is the horn that Euron has, Dragonbinder. We haven't seen used, but it seems like it does have some sort of magical ability to control a dragon. If that's true, it's the only magical horn we've seen used, and we see that it kills a man and turns his lungs to ashes. Clearly, it has some sort of magical properties. So, if the Horn of Winter wakes dragons from the ground, possible that it brings the wall down, is what we've been told. Jormun's horn. When you blow it, it would be interesting if there's an ancient ice dragon within the wall that could also then be the source of the wall's magic, that it wakes that dragon that wakes up and creates a crevice in the wall from where it once was. So we at least had the context of this: a fire horn controlling a fire dragon, maybe the ice horn controls an ice dragon. So I don't know if that's what'll happen, but I really like that idea, and I like the symmetry that we've seen something like it happen before. And you have the Jormun's horn details that would then be a little different from what we've really been given, but still kind of fit. George likes to do these sort of things. I feel like, so I can see details in it that really fit.
Yeah. I think Euron's going to have a lot to do with the wall coming down.
Yeah.
Could be, certainly, yeah.
I think somehow he's going to get a hold of that horn Sam has. I mean, he somehow might even know, because there is theories out there that Euron has a glass candle. It makes a lot of sense too. That what is it, Earth on Nightwalker or whatever? That's probably it. That's a good chance that's probably Euron.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
and there's a faceless man in the Citadel as well, and we don't really know what he's there for, but we know that Euron's used faceless men in the past for his bidding. So, are they allied, or will they come together in some capacity in the Winds of Winter? So when do you think exactly? So if Euron's the one that brings it down, or some action Euron forces to happen, whether someone takes it to the top of the high tower or however they do it, when does the wall come down in the books?
I'm thinking towards the end of the Winds of Winter, and then A Dream of Spring will probably be all about the Long Night, is what I'm thinking.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's so much and we kind of have a map for it, since we do have the show. We kind of know where certain things are at least trending, that there's a lot that has to happen in Winds yet. We're so far behind where certain characters are in the show that
Right.
I think it could be certainly towards the end of Winds that something like that happens. But maybe George will surprise us, and we'll have a really different landscape very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about it, especially if it's going to happen during or shortly after the Battle of Blood, the Battle of Old Town. It could happen pretty early on, but I kind of suspect that I wonder if, like, the epilogue to the Winds of Winter is not the perspective of like a Night's Watchman, as the wall collapses, as an ice dragon bursts from its icy cells, or as the White Walkers attack, however it occurs.
I changed my answer. I like that idea.
Yeah, but still, I mean, you guys are right that it's probably coming at the end. I just wonder if it's if it's going to be from someone's perspective up there. This is just me again. We're theorizing here. It would be interesting if it occurs earlier in the story and the White Walkers haven't yet come to the wall. It just happens. Imagine all of that chaos ensuing at the wall. You've got Jon dead. The Queen's men are battling with the wildlings. Does Melisandre take Jon's body and like drag it somewhere secure as the wall's collapsing and all this shit is happening? That would be a very chaotic scene. I could see something like that occurring. George would have a lot of fun with a storyline like that.
Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen at the wall while Jon's dead, because you got the Queensmen, you got the Wildlings, and then you got the band of
Night's Watchmen.
And the Night's Watchmen. So I wonder. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some sort of civil war going on between the Queensmen and the Wildlings, maybe banding together.
Yeah,
and some of Jon's friends might come back, like Dolar said,
Yeah, yeah. Maybe the Horn of Jormon releases Salisa's mustache power or something. Oh God. Please, Stannis, just tell her to shave that thing or shut the fuck up. Oh God. Well, let's jump back to the Dragon and the Wolf. What was your initial reaction to that episode? Well, what do you think about it? How do you think it set up the end game for season 8? Kyle, why don't you start with what your reaction to the Dragon and the Wolf was? Because I know actually just from the brief interaction we had before that you and Brett and I had before you came on the podcast. It seems like you had there were some problems you had with season 7, which I think we all probably share. But talk about the Dragon and the Wolf and talk a little bit about your reaction to season 7 in general as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think season 7, and you talk about expectations, and we of course have expectations that will never be met as fans nowadays in this story. But I think what happened with season 7, as much as I liked it, and there are individual scenes within season 7 that are so good. The cold open is one of the best starts to a season out of all of them. The Hound returning to the Riverlands where he left the man and his daughter to die that's classic George. I mean, talk about the human heart in conflict with itself and having to face a decision you've made in the past. I thought was really, really a good scene. Probably one of my lower sort of favorite scenes in the season and the series. The Dragon and the Wolf. I thought it was a good episode. I think season 7 was jumpy. I think they could have made it into 2 seasons. Really, is my opinion of it, because there was so much going on, and I get they're trying to get to the end game. But Game of Thrones has been really good because we've taken the time to set up the table. And when you're watching it on a weekly basis, sometimes that feels like not a lot happened in this episode. But then when you get to that table clearing episode, the payoff is there because you put the pieces in the correct places. Whereas it's not quite as interesting sometimes where you're like, oh, and then they're gonna march from Casterly Rock to Highgarden and they're gonna capture Yara and you're not even gonna see it. And all these things are happening so quickly that without the setup, they don't have quite the same punch.
Right.
And I think a lot of what happened in season 7. Spoils of War was really good. That battle scene was, I thought, excellently shot and gone off. I think Bronn should have died. I think that would have given us, you guys talked about it in I think your first episode, where it's the thing we love about Game of Thrones and the books as well is we get these characters that are put into situations because they've made decisions that make sense for them, and then they're there and they die or something happens to them, and it's horrible because we have to watch it happen, but it makes sense. And we have this scene all ready to go. Bronn's here doing his duty, sitting on the big crossbow, and it really felt like one of those moments that was about to hit us. And it was I love to talk about these smaller characters that we latch onto. And watching him die there felt like that was the decision I thought they would have made. So him not doing that there, I would have done it differently. But as far as episode 7 goes, a lot of people really, I feel like I've seen a lot of hate towards the beginning scene because it's really long, and it is. I actually like that part of it because it really set up there's this really slow cadence to these characters coming together. And I mean, like you said, we're seeing characters together that never did you really think you were going to get to see together.
Right.
So I think it needed that time to breathe as you see, Cersei walk in and the Hound and Brienne are together and all these things happening. I liked it. I thought I was sitting on the edge of my seat while it was happening.
Yeah, and I agree with you that in retrospect, and this week when I went back and watched the Dragon and the Wolf, that scene works better for me than when it did, because I was kind of like, that was the moment, that scene was some of the moments that I wished season 7 had more of by having more episodes, that I thought they could have done a lot more. especially with the Beyond the Wall storyline of, I just wish there had been just a little more time frame on that. Give us a couple episodes of that. Give us, them going out and getting so far and, getting caught in a winter storm or something, and then going to the next week to finish up. Just because you need that time, because there's so much that happens. And I'll be honest, I'm not one of these people that harp on travel time. If you harp on travel time, you'll never get anything done. I mean, George says in his books, look, I've got to tell a story. So sometimes I've got to move characters and events around to make it work. But I just think that there was just, the stakes were so high in that individual episode, Beyond the Wall. Everything had to hit perfectly, and it just happened, and it seemed, it just didn't seem realistic for a Raven to get, for Gendry to run, and then a Raven to get to Dragon's Den, and then a dragon to fly. I almost kind of just thought, if Dany had just come north a little bit, or if she kind of had a premonition, or Bran had skin changed one of the dragons and they became restless, or something. So I'm like you. I wish there had been a little more time, a little more patience taken with some of this. I think it would have vastly improved season 7.
I think so too. I do like playing devil's advocate with that episode though, because the Raven thing. The only thing is them walking beyond the wall, and then Gendry getting back to the wall so fast. I think that could have been possible depending on how long they were walking, because you're walking a lot slower than you're running. So I think that could have been in the ballpark, because they may have only walked like
sure,
5-6 miles.
Like Kyle said, we saw the Army of the Dead was moving south from the first episode, so they could have been close. And I agree with you. And I failed to mention in my point just a minute ago that in the series premiere, in Winter is Coming, season 1, episode 1, the entire royal court goes from King's Landing to Winterfell. Just to wrap up the point on Beyond the Wall, that the stakes were so high to the royal court moving from King's Landing to Winterfell. That doesn't really matter. I mean, yeah, it matters. They got to get there, but the stakes of Beyond the Wall are so high that every little thing has to hit exactly for Daenerys to be able to get there. That I thought, just a little more time, or even a change in the storyline would have worked a little better. But again, I don't want to harp on on things that we don't like, because it's still a story, and I was still moved by that episode.
Yeah.
So
the moment in that episode, and well, you said it as far as fixing it, it would have been as easy as having Daenerys just show her back on Dragonstone, and this, of course, could have been sort of before they had gone out, and she's thinking about Jon and how she wants to handle the situation with him, and just decides, you know what, I need to see this for myself. I've never even been to the wall. I need to go see this Army of the Dead that they're going out to face. If it's there, I have dragons. I can fly up there and go see this. And then when she gets there, it's not quite as, it's still a little Deus Ex Machina, but like
right,
a lot better than the Raven getting there. And anyway, when yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Or even in the context of, she could say to Jon, look, I listened to Tyrion and all these other people on the battles, on the war, and look what it got me. I had to take my dragon straight to the Lannisters. So, you can do your hunt, but I'm coming too, or I'm coming north as well, because I'm going to take care of this. And that obviously reminds her that, these dragons will die. This is a force to be reckoned with north of the wall. You can't just fly up there and roast them.
Yeah, and when Viserion, like, to be honest, that was one of the moments where I was like seeing him get hit and the blood spilling through him was a shocking moment as a viewer. You almost believe what you're seeing. So I thought they got that moment really right. Whether that happened.
Oh yeah, it was a powerful moment.
I was just, what really took me out of it though is why didn't the Night King take out Drogon? They're still, and I don't know, they and everyone was on Drogon at that point. So and maybe that'll get explained a little more. Maybe the night the Night's King has a plan. I'm not sure.
I think he probably felt that he could take all three of them out. That he had, I think there were 3 or 4 ice spears that they had, and they were just like, well, I'm gonna chuck at this one, and I'm gonna chuck at that, and of course, Daenerys takes off and flies away.
Yeah,
Um,
could be. Yeah.
all right, so let's move on to some season 8 speculating here. Let's talk about what we think is going to happen in season 8. I want to talk about something specific, something a little meta here. Then I'm going to again ask some questions, and we're going to kind of just open this up, and we're going to go balls to the wall here and try to come up with some of the things that we think are going to happen. But Song of Ice and Fire, if you try to, we know it's fantasy, but if you try to categorize it, probably the closest it would be is high fantasy, heroic fantasy. And we know that heroic fantasy has a lot of tropes. And I know some people out there think, George doesn't use tropes. He does to an extent. And I think as we get closer and closer to the end, when these more fantastical elements are included, we're going to see some of those play a more pivotal role in the story. But with all that being said, he does employ them, he does use them. Of course, he subverts them and changes them significantly. So we're gonna start to see these tropes as we get closer to the end game. But I want to read something that I think to set the context for this discussion as we move forward. Someone said this very interesting comment about what, as we get to the end of A Song of Ice and Fire specifically, what does George do with the fantasy trope, the fantasy genre? So first, will he embrace the genre, meaning heroes, dragons, wolves, wizards, or Red Priestess, if you will, and the armies of men, combine together to end this supernatural threat and restore some semblance of order in Westeros and Planetos? Does he completely subvert the genre? Perhaps he has the heroes win, only it creates a terrible future, like Dany is a bad queen, or Jon is unable to rule wisely, and they both fail. Does he reject the genre? Do petty politics and terrible events like the Red Wedding continue to dominate the future of the world and lead to what some describe as would be an unsatisfying end? I think there's some people who would be satisfied with that because they think that that's George's ultimate goal, is to be so real that sometimes the good guys just don't win. Or is it a combination of all those? So let's think about that in context of how does the fantasy tropes work in the end. So I'm going to open it up here. I have some specific questions, but we'll get to those as the discussion goes along. I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll go.
Brett, you want to go? All right.
Yeah.
So tell us what you think is going to happen in season 8.
Well, okay. So oh yeah, that's a lot.
You start however you want to, and we'll
Okay.
just move the discussion forward.
Okay, well, before it all leaves my mind, while it's still fresh, he's going to embrace the fantasy elements for A Song of Ice and Fire, and I think a lot of the subversions that he's done have already happened. Like Robert's rebellion, Robert won. He won the throne. He was a terrible king. He's already subverted the genre like that. I think the ending is going to be closer to the heroic fantasy and the high fantasy stuff. Of course, he's still going to subvert it a little bit. There's still going to be consequences. That I think that's just his general rule. But he wants the bittersweet ending. So season 8, I'm looking at my notes here. I think Winterfell is going to fall in season 8 at some point. I've kind of see that following because Cersei has to come back into the narrative. What are they going to do with Cersei? and how are they going to wrap up her storyline if she's not even going to be if the war is going to end up there. I think they're going to be forced to work together at some point. I think Beric is totally going to die. I think Beric's going to sacrifice himself so Tormund,
like fighting the Night King or something like that.
Yeah, I think he's going to die pretty quickly in the beginning of season 8, and that's going to allow Tormund to make it back to probably to Castle Black first. Maybe. I mean, that's a long walk, but if we're throwing out the travel time and all that, I think it'll be Castle Black, just because that's already a set they can use, and maybe that brings in the Night's Watchman, Duller said, back into the picture, because they didn't even really utilize him in season 7, so they might all go to Winterfell, and that's and then they get attacked again there. Hopefully the Golden Company shows up, and I just hope they have Griff and young Griff. They don't even have to like it doesn't actually have to be Aegon or whatever. They don't even have to include that. I just think it'd be really cool
if
just
some blue hair.
Yes.
Blue haired people.
Yes. Just think it'd be so cool. I mean, you could just throw out the rest of the plot for that, but
we know we're getting homeless Harry Strickland. He's going to be a character in season 8. What? Just imagine when he arrives.
Really?
Yeah. And I think they'll obviously just use him as the commander of the Golden Company. But imagine when if he steps off of the ship and he's got blue hair, people will fucking flip. It'd be so good.
I can't wait to see the elephants too.
Oh yeah, I definitely hope there's elephants, because I especially love that in the Two Towers and Return of the King.
Oh yeah,
when they have those war elephants battling.
Well, I think the elephants are definitely going to be a thing, because Cersei mentions it, and
she does. You're right.
And that episode. So I think at some point the Golden Company is probably going to. I think they'll probably betray Cersei at some point. I'm not sure about Euron and how Theon's story is going to end. I hope Theon lives, though. I really do. I think Dany's going to be the one to die too, and I think that's going to be that third shocking moment, because, and this is why I think this, because in the books, especially in a Nauticast, where they talk about how Jon's story is not fully fleshed out, whereas Dany's is in the very beginning. And I think maybe George wanted, he knew how his story was going to end, but he didn't really know how to start him. And
interesting.
And Jon's always brooding, and if Daenerys dies, that's the bittersweet ending. As Jon gets to live, he's probably going to be some sort of undead type character, and he's cursed to walk Planetos, alone. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. That's all I got.
Nice. Okay. Well, I'm sure you'll have more to say as we continue the discussion. So, Kyle, you can be as specific or as general as you want to be, and we'll get into some more questions that may guide this discussion as we move forward.
Yeah, season 8. There's a lot to go with there. I'm gonna start in my head south here, because you're talking about the Golden Company. Because I have an idea with the Golden Company. Because I see it one of two ways with how David and Dan want to bring it in. Either the Golden Company is just a nod to book readers, and they wanted to say the word Golden Company, and they're going to bring them in and fight with Cersei. Plausible. That could be it. Or, of course, has been really chalked down without young Griff and the whole Fagon storyline not being included. But it's not impossible that the Golden Company is still working with Varys and even Illyrio at this point, and if they are hired to go into King's Landing, that we could see them turn on Cersei, as you mentioned, but have it be connected to Varys and somebody in Dany's camp. We see Cersei, of course, planning to turn on Daenerys after she leaves, which would be George maybe rejecting the genre. It's saying that politics are still going to hold this story back. And I think we'll see that to some extent. But so I could see the Golden Company turning on Cersei and being connected to Dany's camp. Um, as far as so, I really think I think Winterfell's gone. You're right. I think we're still going to get some important pieces from it. There's so much speculation as to what's in the Winterfell crypt that it seems like we're going
Yeah.
to get something, whether that's in the books or the show. I kind of think it'll be both. Um, and I think the Isle of Faces is the geographic place that I look for because it's where the pact was signed, and I could really see in the show us seeing some sort of meeting or summit between who knows if they can actually be worked with, but the Night's King and Jon or Daenerys, whoever that ends up being, I could see us going to the Isle of Faces for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think ultimately, I think the story is about the fight between, and deities are really hard in this story because we don't really know where some of this magic is coming from. But I guess to bring it down to just the base level, I think there are two. I think it's R'hllor, or the god of light and fire, and the Great Other. And maybe that's the Song of Ice and Fire is their war, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting, and I think the third big moment that we're going to get is maybe learning about that conflict, whether that's, I don't know exactly what that would look like in a show context of seeing what gods look like. Maybe we won't get quite that, but I think we're going to learn information that turns the story on its head. Davos, I don't remember the exact episode, but it's after Shireen is burned, and Davos says to Melisandre, if your god burns children, then your god is evil.
Right.
And I remember watching, I was like, I think there's something to that R'hllor is presumably the one who brought Jon back from the dead. Wouldn't it be interesting if that ends up being the bad side? I guess if R'hllor is the bad guy who's maybe responsible for the doom of Valyria, and he's brought Jon back, and now you've got your main character who's working for the bad side. This is high level speculation, of course, but
yeah.
I think you could get some sort of information that flips the story on its head like that. So that's kind of where I fall in. It'll be probably different from that, but that's kind of what I think on that side of it, at least.
I agree with you all a lot of what you said. To me, I have this image in my mind, and I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, and we're going to talk here in just a minute about why that ending may have influenced George quite a bit. But there's a cover of one of the first editions of A Game of Thrones where Jon is riding out on a horse. I think there's a crow in the air and there's Winterfell in the background. And I agree with Brett that I don't know if he's going to be undead or he's going to brood or be melancholy or whatever, but I think Jon is destined to survive but to disappear in some fashion, that he has this immense weight upon his shoulders. This, not only is he conflicted that his life to an extent was a lie, but then he meets, if you will, the love of his life. She dies, because I do think, unfortunately, Daenerys perishes for whatever, whether that's a self-sacrifice or she's killed or whatever. And I'll talk just a minute, a little more specifically how I think that's going to go down. But I get this sense that all of this compounds upon Jon, and he just can't deal with it anymore. He can't, he can't see Winterfell anymore, whether it's still there or not. He loves his family, but he can't deal with what, and he literally just rides out with Ghost, and that's it. You never see him again. He goes off, and I kind of think that the show will they'll jump back to, because there's a pretty famous theory that the way the first official chapter, Bran starts, where Bran is waking up in the morning is cool, and there's the first hint of autumn and winter in the air. I think the show will use perhaps an image of John riding past, the first green growth coming through the ice to kind of signify spring is returning to the world, or summer's coming back, or the seasons are now aligned, however that happens. So I get a sense that John survives, but he can't live. So he survives, but he just can't live in the world that he's in. I do think the shocking moment is Danny, and I don't hold with the Nissa that John's going to have to stab her. That I think that's more of a it's not a literal interpretation of the prophecy.
Yeah.
It's a general consensus of someone has to sacrifice either themselves or whatever. But I do think Danny does die, and I think the dragons die as well. And I actually think there'll be a scene of some sort of basically a funeral pyre with Danny and her dragons in the dragon pit. Just laid out, full regalia, being burnt, kind of almost like the Targaryens are wiped away forever. Because again, John, I don't think John will want to rule, even if he's given the option. I think he's just, nope, I can't do it. I don't think there's a democracy that comes. I think that's too big of a jump in a system of government. But we already have some democratically leaning, whether it be the King's Moot or the way the Night's Watch elects their leaders. I could see some of that starting to be adapted for Westeros, but it's going to be more of like a Magna Carta where.
That's what I was going to say too. I think
where the nobles force the ruling class. And of course, nobles are ruling class, but there's a written document, and who better to write that than Tyrion to lay out some law, lay out some rights for everyone. The peasants are not going to get the right to vote. I mean, that's just it's too much, and George is not going to let that happen. There's too much time between. I mean, hell, really, people really all over the world really didn't get the full right to, and some people obviously still don't have the right to vote, but in Western democracies, it really didn't even happen until the 1920s and 30s. So, well, even the 1960s, if you're discussing African Americans in our own country. Those, to me, John and Danny are again, like we talked about, are the two main characters. I'm going to ask one of my questions here. Do the White Walkers want something? Are they after something?
Well, do you want to go first on this one?
No, right? Because I have no idea, really.
I don't either, but what I do think, and I spoke to it earlier, it might not be particularly that they want something, but what I do think is we don't have full information as to what their motivation is. We of course saw in the show that they were created by the Children of the Forest, and that's a big piece. But it sure does seem like they're sentient. They might have green seer abilities, and that goes into a lot of other further things. But I think they either want something, they have some sort of motivation for what they're doing, and we don't know what that is. And I think we find that out in the next season. If not, it doesn't seem to me in George's writing style to be like to write this story so filled with human conflict and people having to make decisions that are difficult and pitting characters against each other that both have reasonable causes, and then he creates this big bad guy that is mindlessly marching south to kill everything. It just seems to me like there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, but that's what it seems like to me.
I've heard a lot of theories, and I can't say I like them, like any of the ones I've heard, because in the book, in that first chapter of A Game of Thrones, George kind of wrote them like they're the White Walkers or the others, like they have personalities and they have their own kind of culture, and because they seem like they were just playing and toying with this Waymore Royce, was it?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, just
yeah, and that just I don't know. I feel like they have some sort of motivation. It can't just be let's wipe everything out. It seems like they might be a race of their own, not just like these undead beings like they are in the show.
That's a good point because in the show they have the ability to create whites that they control,
Hmm.
and it's kind of if it's exactly true in the books like that the children of the forest just created them, it's almost just like, well, they're just a step below. I do go back and forth on whether they want something, or they're just evil, or and I know a lot of people say, well, there's just not just evil in this storyline, or they're just kind of like loose nukes, like George is a product of the 40s and 50s and 60s America, where at any moment people were frightened that there was going to be a nuclear holocaust between the Soviet Union and the United States, and or that a rogue nation, that came about a little later with the fall of the Soviet Union, but that once you create this power, we're human beings, we can't control it. Thank God, knock on wood, we've thus far controlled it to a great extent, but not that they're mindless, but they do have a mission, and their mission is destruction. So I could see the concept of them just being a loose nuke that the children of the forest fucked up creating and couldn't control. There's also some nuance in the books that perhaps there were two different groups of children of the forest, and perhaps the ones that have survived, or maybe the good ones, are the ones that didn't create the White Walkers. So I just don't know. It's hard to say. Like, so I'm gonna share a little bit more about this later, but I'm gonna send this to you all. So I wrote this was last summer. I wrote something on Reddit, like pretty detailed, about what I was going to think, what I thought was going to happen in season 7, and there's a couple things that I do not hold to, and actually a couple times it got thrown off Reddit because people reported it as a legitimate leak. Now I'm not
Oh.
I'm not saying I'm so great that I theorized and came up with something that people thought, oh shit, this is another leak like we got in season 7. And it also, I don't want to harp on it too loud, because I am not a secret writer for Game of Thrones. I am not a writer myself. So if I'm able to come up with something that people think is a leak, then I'm not sure what that says about the show. But anyways, my theory was I was still beholden to the idea that the White Walkers wanted something, and my theory was going to be that because they're accepting children and they're turning children, that they were after, or they would be appeased by John and Danny sacrificing their child to them, something like that. I'm now that I read that and I think about that, I'm like, that sounds really stupid. So I've rejected that, but that was in this theory that I just felt like there had to be something that, dragons landing and blasting them, and a dragon, a Valyrian steel sword cutting through them, just isn't going to stop these people or these creatures. I just felt like there had to be something more to them.
I kind of like that, but I don't see Danny or John
Well,
sacrificing.
that's the thing, and that's kind of what a lot of the comments were like. I just can't see them doing that. I can't see John and Danny doing that.
Yeah, I could see Stannis doing it.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, because he did it, but
Right.
We have proof.
We have proof.
yeah.
I definitely like that idea. Yeah, for me, it's always gone back to this idea of a war between R'hllor and it's.
I like,
almost
yeah.
called Great Mother.
I
it's
like that a lot.
There's actually this the Bend the Knee podcast was actually talking about something similar to that, but I think it was them, and they used they were saying there's a war between the Great Other and R'hllor, but then they were talking about how maybe the werewoods and the old gods are kind of their own kind of middle ground
spectrum, so that kind of throws that idea out.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
there's no telling.
yeah, it's hard to
Yeah.
say. It's easy to say like, all right, there's two of them, they're fighting each other. That's also like a really simplified version of what you would expect the story to be.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe seven, and there's something to the seven. It's tough to say, and
Right.
every time you think you maybe have it figured out, there's a detail that you really can't overlook. So
Yeah, and I agree with you all on the Golden Company. I do think they betray. I think they're gonna pull that storyline from the books that they famously betrayed their contract with, was it with Volantis,
yeah,
or Lease,
point,
or
you're right.
near one of them, to serve Fagon and come to Westeros. So I think here's kind of what I think is going to happen with the Golden Company. I actually think the first person to betray Cersei is going to be Euron. I don't think he's going to be, and we're gonna talk about this just in a minute. Something a little more about this, but he's not going to put up with his route to being king or having an heir being Cersei with a child in her womb by Jaime Lannister. So first of all, he's not going to put up with that, and I think he's gonna come back with the Golden Company. He's going to demand either for her to marry him or name him or delegitimize the child, and um, Euron's not going to put up with that. So I think he's going to. I don't think he'll sack King's Landing, but I think he's going to overthrow her regime and take control. And I then think that, and this is a little hard to figure out how this is going to happen because it hinges on what happens in the north and where they come south and all of that. But I think the Golden Company then turns on Euron and Cersei when they see, oh, Dany is real and the dragons are real. And so I think they'll take the Targaryen, if you will, storyline from A Dance with Dragons and The Winds of Winter, that, they just want to come home and they just want to serve a Targaryen. And so they're like, now's our time. This is our ticket. We got to take it. So I think that they turn at some point and go to Dany's side.
I think so. Yeah.
I was just gonna say before we wrap up that last one, for the big moment, I have Danny's death also written down. It
Okay.
would be a big. So
Yeah.
I agree with that point. I think she's gonna die. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you look at let's talk about that right now. That's David and Dan, when they sat down with George in 2013 or 14 to get an idea of where the story was going, they said that he told them three pretty shocking moments that were going to come: Shireen's burning, Hodor equaling Hold the Door, and then a moment near the story's end. And a lot of the twists and turns, those two in particular, sort of hinge on, Shireen's definitely hinges on a death. Hodor, a death happens in the show, but we think it'll probably happen to some extent similar in the books, where we find out what Hodor means. So there's a lot of crucial twists and turns in this story, and the vast, vast, vast majority all hinge on death. And so, just real quick, this is not a definitive list by any means, but it's a lot of the more important twists and turns that happen to be deaths in the book. So, we have Jon Arryn's death really kind of kicking off a lot of this. You have Viserys dying. You have Robert, Khal Drogo, and Ned dying in book 1. You've got Renly Baratheon dying in book 2. You've got a lot of deaths in book 3 with Balon Greyjoy and Robb and Catelyn and Joffrey and Oberyn, Tywin, Shay, Lysa Arryn. You've got some more minor deaths in A Feast for Crows, but I think they're pivotal to the stories, with Pate, with Maester Aemon, which is a really sad but beautiful final scene. Eris Oakheart in Dorne. That's obviously going to really affect Marcella. And then in book 5, Quentin Martell, who's not dead. No, he is dead. Get over it. And then Kevin Lannister and Pycelle, which is when I read that, I was just like, yes, Varys, shoot more people. Like, if you had this power the whole time, why didn't you just do it? But yeah, like we said, these are big, important moments, and they're all predicated on death. So we think that last shocking moment probably is a death. You're right, Kyle. It could be something very nuanced, some myth or some arc that we haven't explored. But I think it's sad, but I do think it's going to be Daenerys Targaryen dying.
I like how Varys, shot Pycelle with a crossbow and Kevin Lannister because it's just going to further Cersei's paranoia.
Oh, yeah.
Tyrion's there somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it definitely will. I would agree. I mean, especially when you read through the list, and when you consider that the two big ones that were shared with David and Dan back in 2013 were Shireen, which obviously hinges on her death, Hodor, which Hodor's death is big, but it's also the realization of Bran's abilities and what hold the door means and all that sort of thing, which was watching that live was like, I mean, mind fuck is the only word
Yeah,
you can really
right.
use.
Yeah, that was a lot. I still cry if I see that scene.
Oh my god, yeah, that was definitely, I don't know if the only time, but yeah, when I was watching that, I mean, I couldn't, you can't keep it together. It's just such great writing by George and so shocking the way it plays out. And
right.
Really,
it's just very silent at that moment where he's just saying hold the door over and over, and it's transforming, and I sat there just in shock, like, oh my god, I just can't believe this is he's such a nice. Everybody wants a Hodor in their life, and oh man,
yeah.
But you could also see the resiliency in his eyes, like he was going to hold that fucking door, like he was going to make sure Bran made it, and so you also it tugged at your heartstrings in that regard too, that he was fulfilling his destiny, and he knew what he needed to do at that moment.
I hope he comes back as a white.
Oh jeez,
it'd be terrible, but
maybe he's like a good white. Maybe he's like like he comes back to save Bran or something.
Like, what if Bran's warging into him again? Or not warging, whatever.
No, but yeah, I mean I think that was one of my favorite just moments in the show to go on it for a second, just because as he's sitting there as the young himself, Willis, yes, Willis, yep. I believe, is his name
in the show, right?
Yeah, Walder in the book. Show.
Walder, okay, yeah, I knew. There's too many Walders, and it's
right.
Yeah,
too many Walders. But yeah, as he starts saying, hold the door, and as it's transforming, and you're watching it happen, and you realize that for, 6 seasons at this point, George's writing has just been smacking you across the forehead, and you always thought it was just a funny bit or whatever. I mean, that's the kind of writing that George has hinged on. What the greatness of his books have hinged on is that sort of writing and those sort of moments coming across. So. But for the third moment, I would definitely agree. The only reason I wouldn't say that I think the third one is shocking, and maybe, again, this is because we've speculated for so long about it, is
right.
I think everyone thinks Daenerys is going to die in the last season. But when I do think about watching Daenerys die, I'm like, wow, that would still probably shock me even though I expect it, because seeing is believing. And, until you see that happen, it's hard to really imagine.
Yeah.
What do you think happens to Bran in the end? What does maybe what does he do next season? Where is he at the end of this story? Is he dead? Is he alive? Is he a tree? Is he in a tree?
I know he'll be. I think he'll be in that tree. He's going to be in that tree, but I don't know.
Like a Winterfell tree?
I think he's just in the weirwood net. Like,
okay.
Yeah, I think it's all connected, and but as far as what he's gonna do next season. I'm drawing blanks here. So
Kyle.
Yeah, I one of the most surprising. I thought this as I was thinking about what we were going to talk about in this episode. Um, is always so surprising to me in the fandom that Bran, who has this crazy magical ability to look into the past and potentially affect the past, that's a whole can of worms, but is so lightly talked about within the
Mm-hmm.
fandom. Of course, there are essays and stuff, but I feel like we all talk about so many other things. And I think, like Brett mentioned, you're kind of like, we don't really know the extent of these powers, how it's going to play over screen versus on a book. I do think Bran has to play a major role in the last season as far as, how is he going to tell John about his parentage, his lineage? What other information does Bran know? Presumably, he could know things far beyond we could even speculate for. So I
Right.
think Bran has to play a large role, but I think it's going to be a medium challenge, is what I think, because in the books, I think it will be easier for George to write Bran, whereas in the show, it's not like John's going to walk in and Bran's going to be like, "Hey, John, please have a seat over there. I'm going to tell you everything,"
Right.
and then the
Right.
audience is just going to sit there and watch as we learn all of the questions we've been wondering. They can't do that in a television show.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
how they do that will be. I think Bran has to play a big role. I'm not sure exactly what he's going
yeah.
to do. It's kind of hard to speculate about,
Yeah.
but
I think John's gonna find out his parentage pretty early on though in the season
yeah,
because
I agree.
because I think as it goes, it's gonna be more about it's gonna pick up a lot of speed. I think quickly, so I think he's gonna find out within the first couple episodes, and then the war they're gonna attack Winterfell or man, it would suck if and it might be something that happens. Maybe they're about to tell John, and then the dead starts attacking Winterfell, and he doesn't
That's a
tell
good.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's actually, yeah, that's actually pretty good.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, it's something that could happen. He may not ever know. Like maybe I don't know. I
yeah,
think he'll know though.
yeah, I've
Unless
thought about that too. Does he ever, does he ever truly find out this information, or is this
if
something that we find out to be
if
true?
if he doesn't find out, he's gonna be the one that has to die instead of Danny.
Mm,
Because I don't see Bran never telling him. I don't see Sam never telling him
right,
unless they all die, and I don't see
right.
them dying. So
No,
yeah.
yeah,
So
Bran
if
said Bran say he was gonna tell him. And what do you think John's reaction is gonna be to to learn that information? Like, I don't know how that's gonna play out over the screen, where Bran's like, "Yeah, that's your aunt." Like, is John gonna? Hard to imagine how it's gonna go down. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, I don't know.
yeah. I think
He's gonna be
that
like, "Oh,
right. I think John is his. So this I'm just okay. I'm gonna roll here. John is Ned's son for all intents and purposes. Like he is Ned Stark. He made an oath to Daenerys, so I could see him saying, "Look, this isn't going to affect anything. Like I'm not going to take the throne. I'm not going to stake my claim. I'm going to serve you." Now, what if because there's some theories that if Daenerys goes not crazy, but she starts doing things that aren't good. Maybe she's the one that decides we're gonna go back and attack King's Landing because we need that defensible position or whatever. And he, like Ned, has swore his oath, and he's seeing her do some bad things, and he's conflicted. He's conflicted there with that. I could also see that the the moment between Theon and John being important to Theon, you can be a Greyjoy and a Stark. You're both. That should be turned on Jon. You can be a Targaryen and a Stark. It's okay. You don't have to choose. You can create your own path. I think the reaction though is Dany. Like, how does she take it?
I think so because there's I think the reason that scene between Jon and Theon is a setup for how Jon's probably going to take it, and the question, that's something he's going to have to deal with. So I think it is more about Dany.
And it could be something that Theon turns on Jon because, let's face it, Theon betrayed Robb, so Theon could potentially feel it's his duty to now serve Jon and try to do right by his best friend Robb, if you will, or his brother, his lost brother Robb. Mm-hmm. Cal, do you have anything to add there?
I mean, I think definitely, I would say Dany's reaction would be very important.
Yeah.
She's so hard to get to this point. She's come all this way, and I also think we and the characters could be so caught up in this, and now the battle for the Dawn 2.0, that maybe those things fall to the wayside. They learn them, and it's like, okay, well, how do we deal with, we're not going to deal with these political squabbles while the Night's King is, I mean, he's past the wall, it's presumably happening now.
Right.
You would think there could be some paranoia growing between those two characters, certainly.
Yeah. So, man, there's so many characters that we could talk about. Let's try to answer these as quickly as possible. I'm going to throw out just a bunch of characters. We'll talk about some more here in a minute. But what happens to Sansa? What happens to Arya? What happens to Jaime and Brienne? What happens to Cersei?
Cersei, I would like Cersei to live, but it would just throw a wrench in like a bunch of theories, and I think that'd be. But I think she'll probably die. Probably, through either by Tyrion or Jaime. I think I don't know, but I don't know in the show. I think probably in the show I'm leaning more towards Jaime at as the possibility. I think she's just gonna do. I think she's gonna try to blow up King's Landing or something, and Jaime's gonna have to stop her. Arya, I could see her like sailing west to never be seen again or something to explore. I could see her doing something like that. Brienne, I think, will probably serve Sansa as in Winterfell. I think, or maybe Brienne goes home for a little bit. Maybe I don't know. Maybe she's been wandering around for this entire time, so it would be nice to have her finally get something. Maybe her and Jaime get together, or her and the Hound get together, because I think the Hound's gonna live too. Maybe I could see where he would probably go out, but I feel like his mindset has changed, and he understands how the worlds work, or this world works, but he's always been kind of a pessimist, and now he's not really, but he still has that knowledge. So I think going forward he's going to be a key to how the world works after the Long Night. Did I answer everybody?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
So I think Cersei will die. In the show, there's certainly a chance that it could be from childbirth. There's of course major issues with that idea of her birthing 3 children. Does it count if the child is never born or is born dead? But either way, I think she dies. I've always kind of leaned towards the idea of it being Jaime, but now with Jaime running off or riding off north, it seems less likely. But that could change very quickly. I think she'll die, and it will fulfill the Valonqar one way or another. It'll be Jaime or Tyrion. I think Arya is another character that I'm pretty sure will die this season. you talk about a character that has to have a reckoning coming. We've seen her abuse the power of the Faceless Men time and time again. And if there's one thing we really learned about magic in this world is that it always comes with a price and a hefty one, typically. Blood sacrifice is so widely and often used in the instances in which we see magic used. It seems like the Faceless Men might have this ability to use. They do have this ability to use magic, but they have very strict rules. It seems that they have to adhere to, and Arya has broken these time and time and time again, where she's using them for her own malice. And so, from a narrative standpoint, it seems to me that she would have a reckoning coming for that reason as well. So I think Arya will be facing that and will die. Sansa, I don't. I mean, she's obviously in the line of fire, being in the north, being kind of in the direct path of the Night's King, and she might not be so quick to run south. I figure Jon will probably try to get her to go south as soon as they figure out what's happening, and she won't be wanting to do that. She feels like she has a claim to the north, we've seen, and she's a leader in that geography right now. Either way, I'm not sure that she'll die. But I do think she'll be in the thick of things to happen there.
Yeah.
Brienne and Jamie, and you mentioned it earlier, are a difficult one because in the books we have this big event that we know will be happening in the meeting with Lady Stoneheart and Jamie and Brienne that sure does seem sticky, as though one of them may not make it.
Right.
Who knows what'll happen? So this storyline is like so far past where we can use textual evidence to support it that I think Brienne dying would be a big, I don't want to call it a payoff for show watchers, but it would be heart wrenching to watch Brienne die. She has completed her story arc of the Stark, getting the Stark children back together, which is her story arc in shows and the books. And when a character has achieved their story arc in George's world, they're in dangerous territory.
Yeah, true.
It's not good. So Jamie, I think we'll get more Jamie and Brienne stuff specifically in the show. They'll at least meet. Maybe Jamie will get there just in time to seeing Brienne throw herself in front of Sansa at some point, or whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I think Brienne will continue to be important, as you mentioned earlier. I think those are kind of the major points for those people.
I think that Sansa survives. I don't know how or where. I don't know if she go back with Tyrion. Does she, if Winterfell doesn't fall, does she remain Queen of the North, Lady of the North, Lady of Winterfell? I don't know about that. I get the sense that Arya dies, but she really doesn't. So here's what I think is going to happen with Arya. I still go back to trying to figure out what's going to happen in the North. Do they deal with, it's a terrible bloody battle, but somehow they deal with the White Walkers. They end them, they stop them or whatever, and then they turn south, or they fail to defeat the White Walkers, so they turn south and they're forced to fight Cersei. I'm not sure how that will exactly happen. But I do think there's a threat to blow up King's Landing, as Brett said, that Cersei's got some more wildfire and she strategically placed it or whatever. And I think the Hound and Jamie and Brienne and Arya will try to infiltrate King's Landing. And I think Jamie kills Cersei. I think Brienne and Arya are going to fight. I think it set up their duel in season 7. Maybe Arya decides she's going to kill Jamie. I don't know. Maybe something happens. The Hound's over fighting the Mountain. I think he wins that battle, but I don't see him surviving. But I wonder if the wildfire doesn't go off, or it does go off, and Brienne dies holding Jamie or embracing Jamie, and they kind of die like that, and people think Arya has died. But I kind of agree with Brett that I think we're gonna kind of have a scene at the end where a girl with no name shows up on the docks somewhere and hops on a boat and goes off for an adventure and just kind of leaves everything behind. Maybe that kind of ties into why I think John does that, because they're always described as kind of similar. They have a similar disposition and similar look. Plus, George is very, and I guess his wife really likes Arya, and she threatens him if he kills Arya, she'll kill him or something. So I just wonder if he'll kind of like, if the show will kind of cut it like Arya will die, but she really doesn't, and people don't know that she's still alive.
I love the idea of off into the Western sunset. She gave that speech about that as well. That would be a great last scene to the show.
Yeah. Because that's a very powerful scene. Her in season 4 selling for Bravos.
Now I do like the the Arya does have a reckoning coming kind of thing, because she's abusing her. She is abusing those powers, and but I think she's gonna run off and try to kill the mountain somehow, and it's gonna force the Hound to go after her and get caught up in that. Now, whether she dies or is injured by the mountain, I think that's what's gonna ultimately force the Clegane Bowl to go down.
Interesting. That's interesting.
I think it's gonna. I think Arya is gonna have a lot to do with that.
Nice.
I like that idea.
So let's bring up some more characters. What do you think happens to the Greyjoys? What do you think happens to Davos? And what do you think happens to Melisandre? Does Melisandre show up with a fucking Hogwarts school of red priests and priestesses that are gonna like shoot flame from their hands?
That'd be so cool. Yeah.
I'd like to see the fiery hand dropped into this season as well. The slave warriors of the temple, the Red Temple in Volantis.
Yeah, that'd be.
I'd like to see some badass like red armored soldiers come to Westeros to help.
Makuro, he needs to be in it.
Yeah,
she needs to come over.
we have a you listened to the 3rd episode, so you may have heard this, Kyle. We have a joke. Every character that's in the books that hasn't appeared in the show is just going to show up in the Golden Company. They're going to have like all these. Just throw them all in there. Why not? Yeah.
Oh, hey guys.
The camera pans up, and you're like, "Whoa! There's the Green Grace, and there's Aeron Greyjoy, and all these people."
Hizdahr.
Yeah, he's dead. He got his ass.
Oh yeah. I forgot he. Yeah. I don't know what. Yeah. I guess he is in the show.
He was so terrible in the show. So, what do you think about happens with the Greyjoys, with Davos, and with Melisandre?
But yeah, with Euron, I definitely think we kind of touched on it earlier. Betraying Cersei seems very likely. Euron is untrustworthy, as we hear Jaime, I believe, says to Cersei. He's not a trustworthy ally. As far as Theon's storyline, it would seem, I'm not totally sure how he's supposed to go get Asha or Yara back from Euron, so I'm not totally sure how that's all gonna pan out. We're so far past anything textual. Of course, the Golden Company is being used completely differently than it will be used and is used in the book. But I think Theon, they've kept Theon around and they've been giving him scenes for a reason. They have a payoff coming one way or another for Theon's storyline. They're not done with it. They would have. There's so many storylines they've chopped out that if Theon's wasn't important for some reason, we wouldn't be getting more Theon's storyline. So there definitely will be more to the Greyjoy, or at least get more scenes for it.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think Melisandre will continue to play a big role. I love the little, makes your skin crawl scene where she's talking to Varys, and that I have to die here, same as you, referring to Westeros. Is very like, what? It's as a viewer, you're like, what on earth does that mean? And she says it in a way that's like Varys maybe should know this information too, potentially, or So, and maybe that's foreshadowing to her potential death that we're going to see this season. Maybe she's foreseen her death and knows when or about when that's going to happen.
Right.
So, and George always has, said that Melisandre is one of his most misinterpreted characters as well. So, whether we get that more in this season, because in the show she's often viewed as untrustworthy, evil, ominous, however you want to describe her. And George doesn't quite feel that way about her. Of course, we get a point of view chapter with her where we kind of get to see her perspective. So I think we'll actually get some interesting Melisandre stuff this season.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, and Varys too, because
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, because I have no idea how Varys is going out, but it seems like he's not gonna live either. So
Yeah, I agree with you.
hmm.
Davos.
Davos, I think, man, I don't know. I really don't. It's just I really don't want him to die. So
Right.
I don't know though. I think he'll probably make it though. But then again, like his does it seems like his arc's over too, or maybe I don't know. I don't see him doing much else. So that's dangerous water that he's in. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think Davos is. It's you're talking about these characters in season 8, with it being the end of a show where we've seen main characters die. You could pretty much be like, oh yeah, that person's probably going to die too. But with Davos, the one really big thing about him is I feel like in whether this is the fandom taking it this way or George writing it this way is he's really been the straight man's not quite the right word, but he's that salt of the earth character we have that everybody can relate to. Wasn't born into nobility, of course, is a likable character and these sort of things. But it'd be interesting if the story does go past the long night. Davos would be a potentially good person to get some perspective on what the world looks like after this, because he is a small folk isn't quite the right word either, but he's at least bridges the gap between that and that perspective that we get from him could be very important as the world changes in the end of this season. So I think Davos could have some important perspectives at the very end of this, if he's not already dead.
Yeah. No, I agree. I like that. That actually gives some reason for him to make it out alive too. And I don't see him putting himself in the thick of everything as much as other characters. Like he'll do it if he's not, he'll do it if he has to, but he's not really a fighter, so.
Yeah.
Right. He tells us himself,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think Davos survives and he comes. I think we get a scene where he goes to his little keep there in the Storm Lands, and there's just a I hate to say it like this, but he describes her like this, kind of just a plain looking woman who's just has a big smile and is waiting for him, and he finally gets to go home and be with his wife who he loves, and it's just a sweet, touching little moment.
Maybe
I think maybe what?
Maybe
little Stannis.
Yes,
because he has a kid named Stannis.
No, oh, he does. What?
Yeah, Stannis lives. And can you?
I did not know that.
Yes, he has a son that's at Cape Wrath that's name is Stannis. So no matter what, Stannis lives.
Stannis lives. Yeah, these small little moments could certainly be, because how do you end Game of Thrones?
Right, right.
It's not like there's going to be a last scene of Jon triumphantly sitting on the Iron Throne.
Right.
It's not.
Nope.
And
yep.
But a couple of these small little moments, and we're speculating, of course, but Arya, sailing off into the sunset, and Davos just going home to his wife. These could be these kind of small little moments, even if they're a bit tropey, but these small little moments that could be a good way of just saying, it's over. It's over, guys.
Right.
Back to reality for us.
Yeah, I think Melisandre definitely shows up with some of those other priests. Like we could have that Kinvara come back in that was in season 6. We could. I think they're definitely committed to fighting the others. I think they all die, but they do contribute to the war. Maybe they help, the people escape the North or whatever. The
I see that as
Greyjoys,
like.
yeah, the Greyjoys, I struggle with. I can't imagine Euron, Theon, or even Yara surviving. Like I could see all three of them dying. Um, I mean, maybe one of them makes it back to the Iron Islands and rules there, or changes things there. I just kind of see them dying and that storyline just kind of ending there.
Yeah, it's so hard, and again, I don't want to harp too much between books and shows, but in the books, I have so many ideas as far as Euron and how that
Right.
storyline is going to be on and stuff. But in the show, I'm like, I don't know. It kind of seems like we're past that
I think
storyline.
I think Theon definitely fights Euron and kills him. Like I think that's kind of the part of
Seems like
the
the end game.
redemption of him. I hate to say it like this, but him becoming a man again.
Uh-huh.
I don't think killing and fighting makes you a man, but in the context that last season Euron made such fun of Theon for not being able to stand up to him.
You know what?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
could definitely see that.
You know what was lame was that crotch kick. They could have just left that out.
Yeah.
That took me way out of the scene, and it would
Yeah.
still hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just having to like keep getting back up, like Theon's been beaten down so much, but he's just getting back up, and this guy, is just exhausted, and then Theon starts beating the shit out of him. I agree with you. The crotch kick was just
Yeah.
A little too cartoon version of Game of Thrones.
right. And I think if you ask any woman who gets hit in the crotch, it still hurts. Just because you don't have a penis, it still doesn't feel good.
Right.
So
I'm
real
immune
quick,
to
yeah,
body.
yeah. So real quick, I guess the last few are Sam and Gilly, and let's see, Sam and Gilly and Missandei and Grey Worm. Yeah, I think Grey Worm dies. I think most of the Unsullied and Dothraki probably perish. I have no idea about Missandei. I mean,
I could see her living.
if Danny's not around, I don't know what purpose she serves, but I guess she's such a
She's a faceless man, right?
oh yeah. Oh my god.
No,
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like that. Sam, I think Sam definitely survives. What do you think about the whole? Let's do this real quick. Are there some theories, and this can be book or show. Are there some theories we should reject? And I just want to throw 4 out there. It's all a dream, and Bran is still in bed at Winterfell. He wakes up and he's had a dream.
That to me,
Yeah.
That to me is like the writer. If George did that, that's just him saying "fuck you guys." Like,
Yeah.
which I could see him doing with all the hate that he gets for not releasing the book. That makes sense, okay? But I hope.
Yeah, and we could even be like, here's the Winds of Winter. You're not getting a Dream of Spring because Bran woke up and he doesn't remember the rest of it. No, I don't think that's gonna happen. This is a story written by Sam. Now, I don't necessarily think that's a bad. Like, I think that's bad if that's like, okay, he made up the story.
Yeah.
But I could see like the ending of Lord of the Rings, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute, and I know we've talked a lot here tonight. But I could see Sam kind of writing it down, if you will, like Samwise Gamgee in Lord of the Rings, that he kind of finishes the book for Frodo and Bilbo, and that's what the Lord of the Rings is supposed to be. It's supposed to be this book written by the hobbits. And then finally, everyone dies. The White Walkers just kill everyone, and there's a graveyard of Westeros.
I think.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brett.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah. I think all those need to be rejected, except for the Sam one, because
right.
It does seem like the TV show kind of set up like, oh yeah, it's like a maester or something telling this story of what happened, and George's Fire and Blood book, isn't that going to be told by a maester? So it's kind that's kind of already set up. But I think it's actually, it's going to be real events. But then again, that kind of that goes into conflict with Bran being a tree and telling, you know, the story too. So, but it's probably one of those two, I would think.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I the Bran waking up at the end, it was all a dream. I totally reject that. I really hope George doesn't end it that way.
Yeah.
I reject. Yeah, I would reject that one. The story written by Sam, I really like to like an extent. I do think we get kind of the nod that history in this world is told by the Maesters, where they show uh, uh, the piece from the intro, of course, that we see in the Citadel kind of fly across the screen really quick is a big time nod that like this is maybe a story being told by the Maesters, and so maybe
Mm.
on like a really top meta level, Sam is the one that writes this story. That being said, the last episode is not going to end with Sam closing a big old book
Closing
and
book,
saying,
right.
"And that was a Game of Thrones, kids."
Right.
It's not
Right.
going to end that way. I don't think everybody dies. I do think a lot of people will die, but
Yeah.
I also don't think that John is the last human alive and dies in the closing moments and Winter wins. Um, because that would then make, I subscribe to the idea that the Walkers have more that we don't know about them, and if everybody dies, we probably never found out anything more about them, and I
Yeah.
don't think that's interesting of a story. So I like the idea that Sam maybe is the writer of the details of this history that have been turned into the story we see.
Right.
But other than that, I reject the other ones because I don't think that they make sense in the context of the story.
Yeah. So this, we've just talked a little bit about Sam kind of writing the final chapter, and that's obviously an important element to the end of Lord of the Rings. And we've talked this episode about that bittersweetness that George wants to achieve, and he really bases that a lot on what happens at the end of the Lord of the Rings. And the Lord of the Rings ends triumphantly with the ring being tossed into Mount Doom and the eagles saving them and the armies of Sauron being defeated and Aragorn ascending the throne and the hobbits returning home. But it really ends with this chapter called The Scouring of the Shire. And basically what happens is the hobbits return home, and the place that they thought to protect, and they went on this journey, on this quest to protect, has been affected because the wizard Saruman, who they let live, who Gandalf let live, and the other characters let live, hated the hobbits so much that he went to the Shire and basically just destroyed this pristine environment. And the hobbits have to fight again. They have to fight to overcome another enemy there and set things right. And then the final, the Lord of the Ring has a lot of endings, but the final ending is that Frodo just can't deal with the pain, the wound, all of the things that that has happened, and he eventually boards that boat and sails west to Valinor. And kind of the story ends with all of the magic, all of the ancient races leaving the world. Now, so I think this is an interesting. I don't think this is you can overlay what happens in the Scouring of the Shire and them selling west as something that's going to happen in Game of Thrones. But I think it's the feel. It's the feel that when you come home from the events that John's participated in, or Danny, or Sansa, or Arya, all these people, you're changed. You carry that weight and that burden with you all your life, and you're haunted by what happened. So I think that bittersweetness is, there's a lot of people that we love and we like that survive, but they're still haunted um, by what happened. But I want to pick up on one thing here where Tolkien's story, which obviously has influenced Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire significantly, ends with the rise of men, that men take over the world and all these magical elements and all of these ancient races go away. And he actually wrote the Lord of the Rings kind of as a fake history, as Kyle said earlier, as a fake history for England. But as magic leaves Middle Earth, magic is starting to return to Planetos. You know, do you think magic remains in the world, or is this a rise in the story that then leaves at the end after it's kind of played its part in the Great War, if you will?
That's a good question. It seems like it's destined to go away with the deaths of the dragon, and it seems like it's building up, and then once that war is going to cause so much damage and destruction that I think it'll maybe not necessarily go away fully, but it'll die back down, I think.
Yeah, so I like this question a lot, and so the thing I think, of course, one of the first things that is different about this world that we learn is we have winters and summers that last for very long periods of time, years, generations at times. Um, and it seems to be, as as you get further and you learn more about it, that construct is rooted in the magic of this world. Um, and so I think George has hinted at this a couple of times before, that in the end, this cycle of really long winters and really long summers is broken, and the world returns to, I don't know if its norm is the right word, but to these seasonal constructs where people aren't having to live through 10-year long winters.
Right.
And this could actually have a really big cultural impact, because I've heard some people levy this against George's world, that people should have progressed further than they have at this
Right.
point. 10,000 years of written history, and they're still in the Middle Ages. But when you consider the fact that we are having these 10-year long winters, first off, that would be hard enough for people to progress through. On top of that, we have a couple instances of these magical cataclysmic events that seem to have held people back, whether it's the long night, which we know there was at least one of, and likely or potentially others, where large portions of the population were wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of the biggest ones, of course, was the Doom of Valyria, which specifically targeted a group of people on Planetos that were progressing past this
Hmm.
Middle Ages era.
Hmm.
So it would be interesting if, in the end, and I guess I'm positing that magic is erased depending on the ending events of the show and books, uh, that we don't have these big cataclysms anymore. The breaking of the armor
Mhm.
dorm is another one that's a little different, I guess. But without these magical cataclysmic events, perhaps humanity can start progressing, and perhaps this copies Tolkien's idea a little bit too much of the Age of Men actually being able to start progressing without magic in the world. Seems pretty, on the nose. But it seems to fit a little bit if you think about it that way. So I guess I would think uh, it would be better for mankind if magic did leave and we didn't
Mhm.
have 10-year long winters, and these things went away. So
That's
I think that's how it'll end.
I really like that.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that a lot. And actually, if you think about it in the context of like a metaphor, the fixing of the seasons, the return
Mm.
of a cycle of the seasons, can also be a metaphor for breaking, like as Danny says in season 5, breaking that will,
Oh yeah, I
breaking the
like that.
will. Yeah, breaking the will not only of seasons and magic and all that, but breaking the will of this one's on top and then that one and that one, as she says, because we talked in an earlier episode that no matter who survives to the end, and I think it's generational. I think it's this young generation that survives to the end. They have been through a lot. They have watched their parents repeat some of the same mistakes that their parents and their parents and their parents uh, did. So it's really going to be up to this new generation, this young generation, to change things, and that can be, meta as well. We got to change. We got to change the system. We got to change all of this, not only just breaking magic and stopping the great other, or whatever. But I like that as a metaphor as well for all these other changes that have to happen.
Yeah, certainly. That's one aspect of it. The magical, because that could be really the thing is magic is broken in the end, but for the
Right.
majority of it wasn't magic that our characters were suffering through. It was
Right.
each other.
Right.
Humans waging. That's a good
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one character we forgot about is Tyrion.
Whoops.
Whoops. Yeah. What do we think happens to Tyrion?
Well, I mean, we kind of didn't forget about him. I think he'll do the Magna Carta.
Oh yeah,
type
we did
thing.
talk about that. Yeah.
I mean, we didn't
Um,
talk about him in that section, but
Does
yeah,
he-
I think he'll.
I like
Is he
that
like-
idea a lot.
Is he like the first prime minister of Westeros, or does he finally get Casterly Rock or something?
I think he'll get Casterly Rock. I don't think he'll be a prime minister, but just because the people of Westeros, they're kind of racist and have their xenophobic and all that good stuff for the most part. So, but I think he'll be one of the officials or whatever.
Yeah.
I could certainly see that. I really like that idea. I'll counter argument it and say he dies. But so one of my big three moments I had said on here, and I thought that the first time I watched through the show, I was like, Tyrion Lannister, like so many others, is one of my very favorites. So it's why it's crazy we kind of forgot to talk more about him. But Tyrion dying, I think if the show really wanted to just like say fuck you fans, we're gonna give you a really really sad moment. Watching Tyrion die would be very very difficult because he has been so many people's favorite
Right.
throughout.
Yeah.
He's been our person that we can always turn to give us not only comic relief, but he brings such a realism to the character of not taking this world too seriously while at the same time aptly describing the situation and being able to use his mind. It kind of feels like our avatar sometimes in
Right.
the story. So him dying would be very sad and a big moment. Whether Tyrion is a Targaryen, we mentioned it briefly earlier. There's some good even book context for it. As far as the relationship between Joanna and Ares,
Right.
any special liberties that were taken during
The betting.
during the betting. Not that would have been Tyrion's conception, but that it would have set the precedent for
Right.
Yeah. I have a hard time. The thing is, I don't think the series is going to end with like, oh, Tyrion, Dany, and Jon, your three favorite characters, are all Targaryens, and they're going to share the throne and run a democracy, and Westeros is going to be great.
Right.
Doesn't seem like it'll be the ending. So Jon, Tyrion, and Daenerys all seem like they're probably in the line of fire. I don't think Jon will die, so I think Tyrion and Daenerys could potentially die.
I don't think this needs to be asked, but I'm going to ask it. Does Jon ride Rhaegal in season 8?
Oh yeah.
I think, yeah, yeah, I think so for sure.
Let's hope. Let's hope they get some armor. Like Daenerys needs to wear some armor while she's riding Drogon.
Yeah.
Or hell, even put some armor on Drogon.
She needs a saddle and a helmet.
Yeah.
too.
She really does. I mean, she needs like fucking dragon heads out of like.
Yeah, it'd be so sick.
Yeah, it would be sick. It would be. All right, so we've talked a lot tonight. We've covered a lot of topics. I think we've hit all of the characters we want to hit. We want to do a real quick spoiler section And then I want to talk about something very meta um, with the story. So, spoiler warning: if you don't want to hear this next section, please move along. Um, Again, we're not going to talk about anything that we've either heard or we think or that we've had leaked to us or to the community about season 8. Although we think the leaks that are out there are fake or just completely wrong, and they've run a pretty tight ship this year. But we're going to talk about something that was leaked from season 7 and was not featured in season 7. So that would be, and I'm pausing so people can get out of here. That would be Cersei's miscarriage. So one of the, what, Brett, like 98%, 99% of season 7 was leaked, and that was the one thing that was in there that ended up not happening.
It was that. I think it was that, and it was Jamie not leaving with an army. Jamie was supposed to leave with an army, and he didn't. So maybe Bronn, is like, hey, shows up. He's like, hey, what about me? Because I don't see Bronn. I don't see Bronn. He's got the what is his name? Jerome Flynn or whatever, and Lena Headley, whatever.
It's late. Yeah.
Yeah. But
they don't like each other, right?
Yeah,
in the same room, yeah.
So I don't see what.
I don't see Bronn being like, "Oh, what do you want to do, Cersei?"
I think actually when we didn't talk about Bronn either, but I think Bronn. I think there'll be a scene where like Jamie thinks he's being followed or whatever, and then it ends up being Bronn. And he's like, oh, well, if you're the one person that's going to give me my castle, so wherever you go, I go.
Yeah,
there you go. I like that idea a lot.
He's getting the twins.
So Cersei's miscarriage, why was it not featured? Will it happen next year? And then what's the implication for her with that occurring?
So I have an idea about this, but going back away from the idea that she could die during childbirth, but it seems really likely, if not, well, it seems very likely that she would have a miscarriage because, of course, as soon as we learn she's pregnant, we're like, wait a minute. Valonqar, she only bears 3 children. We've been told this rather specifically. So you think she's going to have a miscarriage. I figure this will happen. Maybe the show will use that plot line as a way to drive Cersei kind of further into the madness that we see her kind of go into in the books. Cersei's much more irrational, I feel, in the books than she is a lot of the time in the show, or at least we get to see her thoughts, so maybe it seems that way. But Cersei's children were everything to her. And so maybe now, she is going to have another one. It at least gives her this hope for the future that is then taken away from her. That could be the last straw. That really, maybe that's what kind of ignites her. Not want to, but starts the storyline for her to burn down King's Landing with wildfire. It could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to say. I could certainly see that. Being what happens with that.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right there, Kyle. That a pregnant Cersei without Jamie, she's going to protect that child. A Cersei who's miscarried, one, like I said before, is now open for Euron's advances, which I don't think she'll like because Jamie's left her. She's just lost another child. He may use that as a crux to try and take over. But I do think that's the breaking point for her. That, and especially if she finds out that Jamie left and he's fighting with Daenerys and Jon and Tyrion, and she's just there by herself. Yeah, I'm sure she goes mad and, even worse than
mad.
Yeah. Yep. And I also think it sets up, Jamie's going to want to if Cersei's pregnant, Jamie's going to want to go save her and the child. If she's miscarried and she's getting ready to blow up the city, I don't think Jamie has any problem killing her or letting her die for the mistake she's made. He's not gonna do that to his child, especially when he's finally come to the realization that he should have been a father to these kids.
Yeah, it seems like it fixes a lot of narrative problems that wouldn't otherwise be there. If this happens, you can see, well, that would make Cersei crazy. It would or drive her into this depression that could lead her to do these things, and it would make sense for Jamie's motives. So it really seems like it fits into where we expect.
You heard
the
it
storyline
here
to go.
first,
Yeah.
and everyone.
That's right.
Well, you heard this here first, everyone too. Be the uncle dad you're meant to be.
Uncle Father.
Uncle Father.
Wow.
Or you end up with Joffrey.
Yes. Yeah.
And suicidal Tommen, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about why George chose the title "A Song of Ice and Fire" in the context of the Endgame. Why song, why ice and fire, all of that. So, what do you think represents ice and fire in this story? Are there multiple things? Is there specifically one thing or two things that represent that?
I'm sure there are. I tried to think of something for this, but none of it was original. So I'll let Kyle go first. No.
Yeah, that's all right. Nothing's original at this point in this
Yeah.
fandom. We've all
Right.
been around talking about it so long, but I do have a couple of thoughts on this one. I definitely think it's, George is, a master of layering. Everything is, relevant to all these different storylines. So I do think it's layered. But first and foremost, I do think it has to deal with Jon Snow being a Stark and a Targaryen, the houses which represent ice and fire in Westeros. We, of course, see Rhaegar in the House of the Undying, announcing his first son, Aegon, as he who is the Song of Ice and Fire. It's maybe poetic of this fight that Dany's going to have with the Walkers. But again, what I go back to, and we might have a bit of foreshadowing as well, as I was thinking about this answer, one of the things I thought of was in season 5, episode 9, right before Shireen is very sadly burned, Stannis asks her, they're talking about the Dance of Dragons, and he asks her, why'd they call it a dance when it was in fact a brutal civil war? And she says, I think that they were being poetic. And the Song of Ice and Fire certainly could be maybe George being poetic about this fight between R'hllor and the Great Other, if you agree with that context of it, that a Song of Ice and Fire is the poetic version of A Dance of Dragons, which were both wars, so we at least have context that it's been used that way before. I think that's one of the layers, is that it's the story of the fight between these two great sides. And if in the end, as we talked about, that magic ends from this world, then the histories of everything we've seen is that the song of this great war between these two sides. My really top level speculatory answer as to what I think it could be. Yeah, I just like this idea of George and everything we've seen. We have so much history dating back, everything we get from the World of Ice and Fire book to all the other side stories that we've gotten. Maybe they're all a part of this story where these long seasons do exist. And if in the end that's broken, maybe we can get stories in the future down the line. As we know HBO will be putting on more of these, where in the future we see a dramatically different Planetos after this cycle's been broken. And that's no longer a Song of Ice and Fire because that story's ended. We have a new world.
Yeah, I think he chose to call it a song because I mean, I didn't even think about what you said. The dance of dragons. It's more poetic.
That's
I think that's pretty spot on.
yeah, that's great.
And songs are a pretty common way to communicate a story, especially in
Yeah, that too.
Westeros. So
Yeah, so what that's one of the things I want to pick up on here is, what's the implication of the title song? Song is, like you said, it sounds very poetic. Song of Ice and Fire sounds great, first of all, as a title, but is there an implication within the story itself? Because, a lot of the characters that we meet, especially Bran and Sansa, they have arcs where they begin to realize what the world is really about. That it's not the stories and it's not the songs that you hear that give you the truth. It's much darker. It's more realistic. It's gritty. It's all of these things. But there's still even some older characters like Quentin Martell and Barristan Selmy who still stick to some of those notions that are in the songs. So I think I'll ask this question like this: Is there a possibility that there are two endings to this saga? That there's the actual ending that we read. We've read it through thousands and thousands of pages by the time it ends. And then is there a possibility that the Song of Ice and Fire becomes a real in-universe tome that's written by Sam or someone else? Maybe not Sam, because Sam would probably tell the truth, but becomes something that, a singer can sing in front of a great fire of a lord's castle to convey what happened. Oh, when Jon Targaryen rose up and took his rightful place to beat back the demons of the north, or the great queen came from the east on her dragon back. Something that you find out that what they start telling each other is not real, and it's partially inspired by what really happens in our own world. I mean, there's I don't want to pick on any religion or anything here, but we base a lot of our lives on these ancient texts that were written thousands of years ago. That a lot of it was done to either be a metaphor for ways to act or ways to do things that wasn't really, we can interpret them, is what I'm saying. We can interpret them incorrectly, or they can be intended to have been rewritten or reimagined by the authors for another use. So, I just wonder if song is also an implication, like you said, that it's more poetic to sound that way, but also there's, the singers start singing it, and the real story is lost to the ages.
Yeah, so I really like that idea too, and we kind of glossed over it, or I think we've been trying, like, kind of getting to it, but like the ending of this show and of the story that we love isn't the end.
Right.
Hopefully, isn't the end. This world will go on afterwards. I think, and I think most of us think. Um, and so, in the context of a song, what that means is this story in 1,000 years, in 10,000 years, will have been passed down over that time frame. So, in a song might be a great way that it is. I mean, we see it in George's world all the time, where characters constantly are talking about, oh, it'll give us good story for the singers,
Right.
and they change details because this word rhymes with this word, and now it's a different story. But so I actually really like the idea of, after this tale is done, as time goes on, the story will be told, and John and Danny and their names will go down in history, and be sang down to future generations.
Right.
It could be that Song of Ice and Fire, the telling of this story. So I think that's another layer that absolutely plays into George's world. So
Yeah,
I
because
really like
you're
that.
right.
Yeah,
Because again, with George's writing, you're right sometimes with whatever answer you give, because Song of Ice and Fire can be John, it can be John and Danny, it can be dragons and the White Walkers, it can be R'hllor and the Great Other. I mean, there's so many implications that it could be, but I really think there's something to the idea that, I mean, from the beginning, George is painting the picture of singers and maesters and all these people who have control of the narrative of these stories, because you're living in a pretty illiterate culture. And it was, it's based on our own culture where we pass things down orally. And it wasn't until much later in mankind's development that we began to write things down and figured out that technique. So yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. And in universe, the most recent example, I mean, there's a lot of singers that create songs about Tyrion and others, but you only have to look at Robert's Rebellion as a pretty good example for what could be conceived as the truth and what can be conceived as the song. And the song is much better that Rhaegar and Lyanna were the cause of Robert's Rebellion. And one side could, you could imagine Robert Baratheon's court. There's a song sung about how Rhaegar kidnapped and raped Lyanna. In a sympathetic court to the Targaryens, it could be these two star-crossed lovers, kind of like Romeo and Juliet, shaped by destiny. But then there's the truth. Yes, what Rhaegar did was, a piece of kindling in the fire that was Robert's Rebellion. But the truth is that the Mad King and then the political ambitions of his nobles really caused it. It was, losing Tywin Lannister as a hand. It was the mistreatment of his queen, the Kingsguard standing by, the fact that he saw conspiracies in the shadows, the fact that some of those conspiracies could have been orchestrated by Varys for whatever reason. Obviously, the torture of Rickard Stark and Brandon Stark, calling for the heads of Ned and Robert, and his love for Wildfire and Jaime ultimately stepping up for that. That it was this political, this mounting years and years of mismanagement of the realm and madness that really caused Robert's Rebellion. But again, the song sounds so much better when it's the dragon prince and the Lady of the North or something like that.
I totally agree. I don't think I got anything to add to that. That was
I love the idea of the song, but like as you put it, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And especially from a guy like George, the singers and maesters, like we talked about, having control over the narrative is a rather interesting way to think about the story.
Right.
So
yeah.
Right.
I really like that point. Yeah, I like thinking about it just as you put it. Yeah, well put.
All right. Well, speaking of songs, my heart cannot go on anymore tonight. I am so tired.
That was a good one. Yeah.
This was a great discussion. I mean,
I think this is going to be our longest episode yet. But
oh, definitely, yeah, definitely.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No. No, we've had a great discussion tonight. This is something that we'll probably do again, and Kyle, maybe we can have you back on because it's been a real treat to have you.
I'd love to
join us as we get more word on season 7 or season 8, as we get a better idea of what may happen, or we develop new ideas, new theories. So Kyle, thank you again for joining us for an amazing episode. Tell the fans where they can find you on social media.
Oh yeah, you can find me on Twitter at kwillross, or at kwdent2. I also use that as my Song of Ice and Fire Twitter, so I don't annoy some of my other friends. I have to retweet a million Song of Ice and Fire things. But yeah, so I'm mostly
All right.
on Twitter.
And we'll be sure to provide the links for you, Kyle, in our description.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me so much. I had an absolute blast sitting and talking about Game of Thrones for 4.5 hours is about as It doesn't get a whole lot better, to be honest. So thank
There
you
you
guys
go.
Yeah, thank you
yeah.
for sticking around so long.
Yeah. Well, thanks again to Kyle for joining us. He was a great guest. We're really happy to have a fan on and have him tell his story and help us out. And I think he provided some really good insights and some great predictions there. So thank you to our fans out there for listening. We love you all. We hope you're enjoying the podcast. Help us spread the word. You can find us on Facebook, Planetos Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Planetos Podcast. We want you to email us. We're looking for ideas. If you want to be a guest, if you want us to cover a certain topic, email us planetospodcast@gmail.com. And as always, you can find our podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube. So we hope that you will join us for another episode soon. I've been your host, Travis. And again, you can find me on Twitter at Sarah_Travis.
And I'm your other host, Brett. You can find me on Twitter at HomelyPillow. And also we need some reviews, you know. So
Oh yeah.
So if pop over to iTunes or Google Play or just smack the like on SoundCloud or YouTube, whatever, just leave comments. We want to hear your thoughts and opinions, and yeah.
Yep. Smash that like button.
And if you want to give us a bad review, it's fine. But
whatever. Little Stannis will hunt you down.
Yes. All right. Well.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Good night. Or
good night.
Good morning.
Or goodbye. Good morning. whatever time it is.
The intro song is a little ditty named Jungo's Ballad, and that was written by Dylan Revihs and myself. And the outro song is called Smack, and that was written by a good friend of mine and his band, Bleach Garden. Enjoy, and as always, links are in the description.